Welcome to Across Cultures 111, Culture and its Impact on Military Operations. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Sarah McMullen, and I serve as staff and faculty for the School of Advanced Leadership and Tactics here at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. The terminal learning objective for this lesson is to analyze cultural considerations for military plans and operations. The enabling learning objective is analyze cultural variables. This 3-hour block of instruction is intended to move you from cultural understanding and cultural awareness to cultural competency and expertise. It's to help you develop a framework from which you can examine and analyze any culture in general terms. Lessons learned from both Iraqi freedom and enduring freedom is that disregarding foreign cultures can initiate a cycle of kinetic actions and reactions that can adversely affect mission success. Cultural expertise requires a solid and thorough understanding of what culture is, how it develops and changes, and how it impacts human behaviors. The ability to assess and analyze and predict human behaviors based upon culture can aid in mission success. So as you listen to the following letter, I want you to reflect on what is being presented and jot down a few of the key terms that come to mind.
Dear Ed, sometimes I'm convinced that I've been teaching English in this little Muslim town too long for my own good. The whole social structure of this country tends to undermine the goals of the Western scholar. Logical thought processes, on which most Western teachers rely instinctively, have just never been taught here. Deductive reasoning is unheard of. The teacher is thought of only as a lecturer and a recorder. What he teaches is not original. It has been true from the beginning of time and known since the time of Muhammad. The teacher has made no discoveries of his own and will make none. But as he has been fortunate enough to have been taught, he is in turn privileged to reteach what he has learned. As truth is unchanging, there is nothing to discuss or question. The teaching process is a continuation of the oral tradition. What has been learned in the past is now transmitted verbatim to the student who writes it down and memorizes it. This method, however, is more than tradition. It is dictated by the nature of the cosmos and can only be the repetition of what Allah revealed to Muhammad, the last and greatest of Allah's prophets. There is no other way of knowing. As original knowledge does not exist, the most reliable way to learn is through the same medium and by the same technique by which has been acquired in the past. Accordingly, there is no discussion and no personal opinion in the Muslim classroom. The teacher either reads to the students from his notes or a notebook, and they copy in their notebooks what is read to them. Sometimes a student is substituted for the teacher, and he reads to the boys. No papers of any kind are ever written, and there is no questioning the teacher. To these people, there is only one truth. The idea that two experts might interpret the same facts in opposite ways is inconceivable to them. An American teacher once proved to his class that 1 equaled 2. No one objected, and the students all wrote the proof down in their notebooks. The teacher had shown it to them, therefore it must be true. There is no distrusting the conveyor of the source of truth. In this society is the form, not the content, that is important, and herein lies the most significant problem that the Western teacher has to deal with. In the Muslim scale of values, it is not so important that a student cannot know 17 subjects at once, as long as the curriculum makes it look like he is learning them. It is not so important that the students have a high rate of absenteeism, as long as the books show full attendance. The same is true of teacher attendance. Thus, the passing grade of 35%, though in reality showing an inferior knowledge of the subject, is in practice considered adequate. A boy with 70% knowledge is considered very good. The student himself does not feel that learning itself is important. What is important to him is the card that shows the teacher that has given him a passing grade. The common concept is that the teacher gives you a grade, you do not earn it. That is not to say, of course, that the same phenomena do not exist elsewhere. It is to say only that they predominate in this country. A boy with a 35 to 50% grade in the United States, for example, does not kid himself that he has learned very much, and indeed may consider, with regret, that he missed a good opportunity to learn. Here, the question of learning or not rarely comes to mind. A continuing problem is the one of cheating in the classroom. There is rarely a test of any kind given during which cheating does not occur, for in the Muslim classroom it is almost literally true that it is sufficient for only one student to understand the lesson. Of the 5 pillars of Islam is almsgiving, the aid which one gives to those whom Allah has made less fortunate. The concept of almsgiving pervades all aspects of life. Thus cheating, and by extension bribing, nepotism, etc., are all not looked at as being morally wrong in the way that they are in Western world. To the Muslim, it is obvious fact that Allah has made some people more intelligent than others, and in sense, classroom performance is preordained. There is no feeling that hard work may enable one to pass by his own efforts, make him a better person, etc. There is only the feeling that, unaided, many will fail, and thus it is the duty to pass on the knowledge to the less fortunate ones. In fact, teachers themselves aid and abet the cheating by lax observation during exams. For a good class record reflect favorably on their abilities as teachers. Unfortunately, cheating occurs not only on exams, but also on a day-to-day classroom basis. On this level, it is a mechanism to save face. When the teacher calls on a student, he is expected to know something. In most cases, it is recitation of some kind that is required. Usually, the student listens to the student behind him who, with an open book, is reading him the answer. By this means of prompting, a student may go a whole year without the teacher ever realizing that in reality he knows nothing. Homework is usually ineffective because the student refused to struggle with it. Instead, another student, or a brother or relative, will do it for them. Behind these external manifestations, we again find different values. Actual gains are subordinate to surface appearances. Intrinsically related to this network of social and religious values is their attitude towards individual effort. It must be pointed out here that their attitude is a realistic one in terms of their culture, yet one which the Western teacher reacts against and must cope with. Life is tough in the Middle East. A lot of work often means little or no change. Thus, sometimes in the past, in order to better live with themselves and the harsh world around them, these people came to feel that individual effort, in most cases, comes to naught. In reality, in this part of the world, effort does not count. It is Allah who determines what is or is not to be achieved. Essentially, this means that the end, rather than the means of value, while to the Westerner, more often than not, is the other way around. Again, it is the problem of the form being more important than the content. As mentioned previously, there is no feeling in the classroom that hard work and proper questions, in short, an all-out effort to understand instead of memorize, might bring about some kind of good, either in grades or in other less tangible ways. Many of the students are capable of and willing to do hard work, but feel it worthwhile only in the drudging path of learning by rote, which they are used to. It is the hard work of thinking that they balk at, the work of understanding that A plus B does not equal A plus B, but equals C, a third object that has to be deduced, not memorized. What must be emphasized is that many of these above-mentioned values make sense in the terms of the society and are wrong only as far as they conflict with Western values as possessed by the Western teacher. For a Western teacher to feel he is accomplishing something, he must, to some extent, instill his own values in the students, for they are only the things he can measure by. What is hard for him to face is the degree to which these American values do not and cannot pervade Muslim life and the realization of the chances against his success. When he realizes that his students are never face-to-face with any other than their country's values, except perhaps in that 40 minutes a day he is teaching English, he is bound to feel he is fighting a losing battle. He sees that he cannot afford to teach only English. He must go beyond this to create attitudes and values which are exactly opposite to his student's own. The student sees from his father that hard work and individual effort count for little, while he sees from his uncle that cheating and bribing lead to the top. He knows that being a relative of nobility is far more important than being intelligent, and he knows that the boy next to him will pass because his father is an important man. Therefore, he might as well show his paper to him and retain a friend. In the long run, it is he, not the Western teacher, who knows how things are done and who will succeed and who will not. The greatest problem comes when the Western teacher begins to see the logic of Islamic values. He begins to doubt himself and becomes too sympathetic to the plight of his students. He is in danger of being half Easternized himself. All the best, Bob.
Now we've just heard the letter from Bob. I would like to take a few minutes to reflect on the following. How well does Bob know the culture of which he writes? How do you know? How able is Bob to assess the cultural context of his situation? And what indicates such ability? What did he say that was accurate or inaccurate, and how do you know? What instances of tone, generalization, comparison, or correlation stood out to you, and why? What statements demonstrate accurate knowledge and careful thought? How do they demonstrate such qualities? And finally, how would you consider this letter as a source of cultural information? Take a few moments to reflect upon these, and then we'll come back and discuss them.
What are your thoughts on the letter from Bob Z? I mean, just in a general sense, and then practically speaking, given your experience in Afghanistan, what do you think about the letter from Bob?
I thought it was a great teaching tool. I thought it was a very frank, very honest letter about, be very relevant to a lot of people's experiences downrange, especially in Middle Eastern or Central Asia countries. The author of that letter expressing his feelings, his observations, operating in that culture, how his Western perspectives conflicted with Eastern perspectives. And also the author does such a great job explaining why it is that way there. It wasn't just that he was identifying how the Eastern culture was different than a Western culture. He was also identifying why is it that way. He talked about how, a student wouldn't be very open to the idea of studying hard in order to pass a test, to hopefully get an education, in order to succeed one day. That's a big risk from their point of view. Versus if I give the answers to the rich guy's son who's sitting next to me and become his friend, I know this guy will take care of me the rest of my life because that's the kind of environment that I'm operating in. Not unlike the way it was in the United States, say 100, 120 years ago,
Sure.
turn of the century, Industrial Revolution.
Did you get the impression the author, Bob, I didn't get the impression he was making a value judgment about either side, East or West necessarily. He was just factually, logically pointing out differences between the two cultures or the two parts of the world, and for situational awareness, like Mr. Kosman mentioned earlier. Would you agree with that?
Oh, I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
I mean, that author, the crux of what he was saying was the culture, the East versus West, it's a product of the environment that they're living in. I mean, the Eastern culture, some of the briberies, what we would qualify as bribery, what we would describe as bribery, it was a product of the environment that they're living in, that they have to operate in so that they can be successful in their lives, how things change, how things are done. And like I was talking about earlier, it's like walking into 1880s New York and thinking, okay, I've got a college degree. Obviously, I should be successful. Obviously, I should be able to get whatever job I want. That wouldn't happen then.
No.
In
Well,
our own country, it was about who you knew.
it doesn't happen that way today anymore either.
No,
In this country.
So why would we be so arrogant as to think that we can ignore the operational environment there
Yeah.
and think that their culture should somehow be different. We can't apply what we would describe as bribery.
I'm sorry.
We can't apply our definitions for certain behaviors to the exact same thing in countries and other places in the world any more than we could between the different cultures within our own country.
And the other thing I got from the letter, and Mr. Kotzman, I don't know if you feel, but I didn't get the impression that Bob felt like his mission was to go over there and change people. While he might secretly think that might in the end be good, I think he was just going to accept the fact that they are who they are and understand who they are and figure out how to work with that. Would you agree with that or disagree, given the letter from Bob?
Very clearly, he wants to just point out this is what are the differences in the culture. And number two, these are the second and third order effects as I see them. And I agree with you that he doesn't put a value judgment on that, but that he strives to, as you say, work within the context of what it is.
Interesting.
He does express some frustration.
Well, sure. Yeah.
But I think it's good that he does. He's not making value judgments. He's not saying they're wrong. He's just expressing frustration because he walked in there with a Western mindset, and now he's having to operate in a totally different society, and he's finding that frustrating.
Not unlike someone from, say, Kansas or Missouri going to South Carolina or Georgia. Culture is a little different down there.
Oh,
And
Going
there's
from
going to be
Forscom.
frustration when they go down there. And the people are going to do things a little different. So, you live down there now, so you figure it out.
How frustrating is it to go from Forscom to TRADOC to go between one battalion and another?
To go from Salt to Cal.
1st Brigade does things one way.
Yep.
4th Brigade does it another.
So, yeah, great points. Great points. What else do we want to talk about here, gentlemen? How about cultural variables? Again, you've been to 4, 5, 6 countries. You've been to Afghanistan, Army-wide, and I know you've been to numerous other countries on the civilian side of the house. When you look at wherever it is you're going, to do whatever it is you're going there to do, what kind of things do you look at? What variables do you consider? And in a military context, as you look at those variables, do you look at them from the prism of this is the mission I have to accomplish, these are the things I have to get done? Talk a little bit about that. Mr. Kotzman, go ahead.
Of course, first and foremost is your mission, and you want to get your mission done. So as you go forward to your host nation, you once again boils down to situational understanding, and you don't want to make snap judgments on a culture. This will lead to false or incorrect judgments. Mm-hmm. You need to know what's important to your host nation. You need to know what's important in the protocols of the people you're dealing with.
Now, as we reviewed the letter from Bob, I wonder if many of you thought that this was a very biased viewpoint, that it was one-sided, that it may have only taken into consideration one viewpoint. But if you look at this letter from Bob, conversely, you might identify that given the situation, this was this individual's perspective. This individual was there for 2 years. This was his perspective on what his experience was. Does that make this a poor source of information? Many would say that it does not. Many would say that it is an excellent, excellent study in terms of worldview perspective, because this was one account, a first-hand account of this particular experience. You may have jotted down some other key terms when you were listening to the letter and also when you were going through the questions in your own mind, that this was very opinion-based, not factual-based, that this was very us and them mentality, East versus West mentality, that this was a very simple perspective or a simple image, and it wasn't broad enough, so it cannot be considered a source of information. But all perspectives are critical when you're conducting analysis and when you're in an examination of culture or given that specific situation. So Bob's reaction to this specific culture may or may not be an isolated event, but it's a true account of his time spent within this culture. He also did, in some people's mind, oversimplify Islamic culture. But we don't even understand what culture that he's speaking of specifically in this letter. So this is a very general letter, but it's to help you understand as you develop that framework that we talked about earlier, is to take information in, to examine it and analyze it, and understand whether it's first-hand knowledge, second-hand knowledge, whether it comes from other sources. And those are some of the things that we're going to talk about today. This is all what's considered that cultural framework, and how do we develop a cultural framework. So you may have had different opinions on on what this letter was and how it affected you and how it impacted you. But take it as one piece of data and take that information then and build within your framework. Let's look a little bit about how cultures are learned, how they're conditioned, and how they're passed along. So here we see that cultural framework. How do you define culture? What does culture mean to you? If I asked every single one of you, you would have a different response. Each of you may have a different answer to what defines culture. However, there are very distinctive features that comprise culture, distinctive features that comprise a society or a group. They are not limited to our values, beliefs, and norms. But those are the things that tie us together as members of a society or a group. And some of those aspects of culture, those characteristics of culture, include that culture is shared, that it is patterned, that it's changeable, that it's internalized or habitualized and taken for granted, and that culture is learned. And those characteristics come from a set of experiences. So take a moment to reflect on your own culture with these questions. How did your personal culture develop? How is your particular culture in your society or in your group? How is that reinforced? And how do you know the rules of your culture? There are rules to your culture. If you think deeply about what's right and what's wrong for your specific culture, those are rules. And how do you go about learning about other cultures?
All right, throughout this video that you're going to be getting today, AC 111, you're going to see a series of vignettes. You're going to see different cultural situations, different environments, different people's opinions on their experiences downrange, and then you're going to see some of the responses from our subject matter experts here at the School of Advanced Leadership and Tactics.
I was in Zagreb doing language training. At the time, Croatia was having some political and economic issues. They were just trying to figure out what they were going to be. And while doing my training, I got fairly familiar and friendly with this group of Croatians who were city people and Western oriented. We were sitting around one day talking about Croatian politics, and I answered something. I said, you know, all you need to do is have an election, and then you do this, then you do this, then you do this, and everything will be fine. All of a sudden, I look up, and they're just looking at me like I just stepped off a spaceship from Saturn. And I felt like an idiot. Well, and I should have, because nothing is that simple. What Americans frequently have a problem with, and I was one of them, is they just think, well, why don't you just do it the way we do it?
All right, so what did you gentlemen think about that little clip about the gentleman's experiences there in the Balkans in Croatia?
I think that kind of solidifies what we were talking about as far as trying to apply an American solution to an un-American problem. One size does not fit all, And again, we tend to have a very myopic view of what right looks like. And sometimes we're not right, unfortunately.
You've seen that before when you were downrange, where people just think you can come in, do the American solution, and it'll work in another culture.
Well, I like the scenario where he's talking to people outside of work, and it's so true. Anyone who's been stationed overseas has had a similar experience with their host nation, where they have a pleasant conversation of maybe politics, and this is the same outcome. And you see our folks at the captain to majors levels, where they're on the ground. They have a very good situational awareness, but their challenge is to communicate that situational awareness up the chain of command. Say, sir, I see your vision, but this is reality on the ground, and this is how we may want to change that vision, or how we may want to take this in another direction. And you have to have that conversation. You owe that to your rater and senior rater.
So the last question we discussed was, how do we learn about other cultures? Well, this is one way that military planners assess other cultures. Military planners describe the operational environment in terms of operational variables, PMISI, PT. These operational variables are broad aspects of the environment, both military and non-military. These will differ from one area to another. They'll differ from campaign to campaign and across major operations. Operational variables describe not only the military aspects of an operational environment, but also the population's influence on it. Joint planners will analyze the operational environment in terms of each of these 6 interrelated operational variables: political, military, economic, social, information, and infrastructure. These 2 variables, Army doctrine will add 2 more, and they are physical environment and time. These operational variables, to make it easy, are abbreviated to be PMISI-PT so that we can remember them. But they provide a view of the operational environment that emphasizes all of the human aspects found within that area. Political, an example of political would be groups, the power, responsibility, the leadership, what the influence is there. Military, you can consider as capabilities of the enemy, adversaries, host nation, multinational military organizations. PMISI-PT, again, this is one way that military planners will understand, analyze, and assess that operational environment. In addition, we use another one. It's called ASCOPE. Commanders use ASCOPE to analyze the C of MET-TC, which also stands for civil considerations. MET-TC is another memory aid that we use that identifies the mission variables, which are mission, enemy, terrain and weather, troops and support available, time available, and civil considerations. Civil considerations really look at those things that reflect the man-made infrastructure, civilian institutions, and those attitudes and activities of civilian leaders, populations and organizations, those that are within the area of influence, our area of influence, and where we conduct our military operations. When we consider areas, what we're looking for here is environmental concerns and environmental considerations. When we look at structures, we're assessing the infrastructures, institutions, man-made structures. When we're looking at organizations, we're looking at social and political. And finally, one more characteristic in identifying our cultural framework are culture domains. This cultural framework is taking into consideration a number of domains, and these are important components of any societal organization. Family and kinship, religion and spirituality, sex and gender, politics and social relations, time and space, economics and resources, language and communication, technology and material, history and myths, aesthetics, recreation and sustenance, learning and knowledge. These are all culture domains, and they help us assess that cultural framework, along with values, beliefs, and norms as we discussed earlier. In addition to ASCOPE, PMISI PT, first-hand and second-hand data collection, these are all things that help establish that cultural framework.
For us, a marketplace is usually a place where we go to buy food or whatever we need. For Afghans, it's also a social place. Lack of activity at the bazaar is a good demonstration that the situation is not normal. When you go there and you see that some shops are closed, there are not very many people, and especially if there are no women and children around, that's a very good indication that the situation is very tense.
Well, I think what that displays is you got to have the spidey senses up. You have to be situationally aware about what's going on, and to do that you have to understand the patterns.
Exactly. I
And
would
that
agree.
stuff to kind of.
We talked about that, empathizing, understanding. You don't necessarily have to immerse yourself in their civilization, but you certainly need to understand some of those social things. Good point. Marketplace to us, we go down there and we buy a T-shirt or a rug to take home. To them, it's far beyond that. It's a place where the families gather. It's a place where the kids come to play and the women to talk and things, ideas exchanged and gossip and things. And for us to roll in there and the place is almost deserted, some of the shops are closed. At first, if this is your first trip to the town, you might think, well, maybe I just hit a holiday, or maybe it's prayer time. I don't know what time it is, but maybe there's something else going on. And a good point. You talk about your spidey sense. I'm understanding what that societal norm is.
Sure.
Okay. Well, this isn't right. Something should have clicked, and that would be your first indicator that things are not as they are supposed to be.
Right.
I had that happen to me one time. We were going into town in Baghdad. We found a guy, a local distributor, who sold DVDs. Mm-hmm. And we had bought several from him. We were using them for kind of a evening entertainment with some of our battalion soldiers, and went in there one day, and the street was semi-deserted. There was nobody in the shop. And I wouldn't let my guys out of the Humvee.
Right.
We just kept driving. And was it something that was going on? I don't know, but we had certainly patterned ourselves. I realized that later, that we were showing up about every 3 days. Mm-hmm. So we had patterned ourselves, and I can't say that I was any cultural expert at that point, but I think what you said was exactly right. There was something that
Something in your gut told you that this was,
Yeah, even in this culture, this isn't right.
Right.
Well, it goes back to, once again, my interpreter telling me this, we need to go. And you don't question him, you just go. And then from then on, you have better situational understanding of where you are and what you're doing.
Yeah, and for the most part, and we talked about this in an earlier discussion, that most of the time those communities are extremely tight, and they all know each other, and they all know what each other is doing. So if a stranger shows up, they know that. If there's something that has happened outside of the normal business practices, routines, a guy suddenly starts digging a hole across the street, that guy's a stranger. He's not from my tribe, my village, my clique. They know all these things, okay? And the kids aren't on the streets and all that kind of stuff. And for an American, I think that's your first tip.
Yep.
Hi, I'm Major Ed Zimbinsky. You all have seen me in quite a few of your other DL videos as you've been going through your 75 hours of Common Core. In this lesson, AC 111, we're looking at all the different factors that define a culture, how a culture came to be the way that it is, what the societal norms are, so on and so forth. A little bit about myself. My bachelor's degree was actually in international business. The same with my master's degree, which I finished while I was deployed to Afghanistan in 2009, 2010. A large part of international business is learning about cultures, identifying cross-cultural risk analysis, how to be able to conduct business in other countries, third country nationals moving back and forth, transnational corporations. As part of that, and part of my research when I was going through my master's program, was to learn about a gentleman named Gert Hofstede. If we take a look at the slide, Professor Gert Hofstede, this man is the preeminent expert when it comes to cultures. Very, very interesting gentleman. He developed the dimensions of national culture. He's been working on this for the last few decades. And originally what he came up with was 4 different dimensions that you could use to define a culture. Those were power distance index, individualism versus collectivism, masculinity versus femininity, and the uncertainty avoidance index. Now, later on in 1991, there was additional research conducted by an individual named Michael Bond, and his research led Professor Hofstede to add a 5th dimension, and that dimension being long-term orientation. Now, I'll give you a brief synopsis of what each of these 5 different indexes are. And I can tell you that these indexes are very, very useful. I used them myself with my team when I went downrange to Afghanistan in 2009, 2010. I was embedded while I was there. I was part of a MIT team, and half of my team went off and they were with the Afghan National Army. The other half, which I was in charge of, went off to be with the Afghan National Police, and we lived with them for a year. Now, these 5 indexes and what they measure is where society falls on a certain spectrum of the scale. Take a look at the slide. The very first one is power distance index. Now, what does that mean? Power distance. Well, simply put, what it's referring to is how willing individuals are within a society to accept an amount of distance between themselves and those that are in power. Case in point, in the United States, in the American culture, the way that we look at it is, if you have a problem, what does every Army leader have? An open door policy. You've got an issue, you can go down the hall. You can go to the colonel's office. You can knock on the door. Hey, I've got an open door policy. Come on in, sit down. Let's talk about what the issue is. In other cultures, that is not acceptable. In Afghanistan, for example, while I was there, if an Afghan police officer had an issue, he could not go to the commander's office and just speak to him. That wasn't allowed. There was a distance between those two. And people accepted that. That was what they expected. They thought that we as Americans were extremely informal. The fact that at the time I was a captain and that I would be speaking to American generals or colonels, they didn't understand why we allowed that to occur. And of course, we had a hard time understanding their system. The next one on the slide there is individualism versus collectivism. This one's pretty easy, and one that a lot of people can really relate with. Individual societies versus collective societies. Here in the United States, for example, people are very much worried about taking care of themselves, maybe their immediate family, but that's as far as it goes. We're very individualistic. We feel that we should be very responsible for ourselves and we should have the freedom to be responsible for ourselves. Other societies are far more collectivist. Case in point, what the nation that I decided to research when I was going through my master's degree was Poland. Poland is higher on the collectivism index than the United States is, than the American culture. And theirs, they believe that we are a society and we take care of everyone in our society. So they aren't just concentrated on their immediate family, their wife, their children, their husband. They are concentrated on the extended family. Maybe you'll have grandma and grandpa living with you, maybe an aunt. You know who every single cousin is. Everybody takes care of themselves, and they look at it in that fashion. And you can take that to its logical conclusion, a nation like China that is extremely collectivist.
Cultures may be individualistic or collectivist in their orientation. An individualist culture is one in which the ties between individuals are loose, where people are expected to take care of themselves and their immediate families. In a collectivist culture, people are raised from birth into strong, cohesive groups. Advisors must understand from which culture their counterparts come to identify motivations accurately and communicate effectively. In this section, you're going to be learning about the different ways people around the world communicate and how this might affect you as an advisor. In order to understand communication, it's important to understand the concept of collectivist and individualistic cultures. Of course, we don't want to create stereotypes here. Every person is unique. But what we're talking about are patterns of behavior that researchers have observed that are common in certain countries and cultures.
We need to categorize the world around us. We have some information that we have about certain people based on experiences that we have had or some knowledge that we may have been told. We have a tendency then to categorize people, and stereotypes are merely categories of people. We have to be very cautious and aware of how we use those stereotypes.
So we're going to be very careful here to say it might be like this, it could be like this, there's some probability they're going to be like this, but we have no certainty on how any individual in any culture is going to ask. We know that from our own culture, and certainly we can't predict that for the other places around the world where you're stationed.
Our goal is to understand genuine differences in how people tend to think and act in other countries. If we understand these differences and similarities, we can get along better with our counterparts and make better decisions in country.
Probably the most profound differences among people on the planet has been the difference between individualism and collectivism. An individual in a collectivist society links their identity with the goals of the group, so their actions then support the goals of that group, and that group could be the extended family, the ethnic group, the tribe, and so on. Individuals in individualistic societies tend to be more I-oriented, make their own decisions, and probably among the best examples in modern society would be the existence of the iPhone and the iPad and all of those technological tools that we can individualize for our own specific needs and likes.
One reason why it's so important to have a good, solid understanding of collectivism and individualism is that most cultures in the world have a more collectivist orientation. If you think about all the cultures of the world as a pie chart, a little slice of that pie chart are the cultures that are focused more on individualism, whereas most of the pie is going to represent more collectivist cultures.
For much of the rest of the world, and in fact almost all the rest of the world, we need to look at what it means to be a we culture. What it means to be part of a collectivist culture, a culture that says the group that I'm part of is more important than any kind of individual thought. And in fact, I see my identity as a group identity rather than my own personal preferences, my own personal values. So I have group goals I prefer to achieve in a group. I have a group identity that's powerful, and the group makes choices, and it's interdependent, not independent the way the I cultures are. So that's quite a contrast, and that contrast affects everything you do when you're working in another society.
Different cultures have different sayings that reflect this sense of collectivism. The Chinese have a saying, the first bird is the first one shot. So you don't want to be out in front of the group, you want to be with the group and maintaining that sense of harmony within the group. So the sense of interdependency that you see in collectivist cultures is illustrated with the Chinese proverb, one arrow is easily broken, many can't be bent. So there is strength in being surrounded by a group. Being alone is not desirable. So in some cultures, this sense of solitude has a very positive meaning. In other cultures, this sense of being alone is almost unthinkable.
I can tell you a story about a group that one of my colleagues did some research on, and he asked how many relatives we can name that are part of our immediate family and related extended family, and how many relatives we can name and their relationship to us. And if you ask a group of Americans that question, usually that's less than 50, okay? We don't really keep track of all of our extended families. But there's one tribe in Eastern Africa where he did his research where the average was 400. So if you can name 400 people that you have a constant ongoing relationship with in your head, that means you behave differently every single day. Even though you might not see those people are part of your decision making, they're part of who you are, and it's a very, very different concept than saying, I'm the person who's in charge, I'm the person who's doing all of these actions. So that collectivist thinking, it's hard to overestimate how much power it has in our interactions with others.
The next one that we have is masculinity versus femininity. This one tends to confuse people. I'm not talking about feminine as in feminine dominated society versus masculine dominated. That's a different thing. The masculine versus feminine index has to do with what traits are valued within the society. Okay? What is a masculine trait? What is something that would be defined as being masculine? Maybe competition? Yeah, we could say that competition is a masculine trait, masculinity. So competition, a little bit of aggression, a little bit of strength. All those masculine traits would fall on that side. All right, that's the masculine side. So what do we mean by feminine? All right, if a country is high on the feminine index, what does that mean? Well, feminine traits would be nurturing, caring, loving, taking care of, the whole concept of nurturing and caring. Afghanistan is an extremely feminine society. Okay, that doesn't make any sense. You know, we've talked about before how in Afghanistan over the last 10 years they've been very progressive, allowing women the right to vote, women in their houses of Congress. You know, we've talked about some other Middle Eastern nations and the fact of, you know, women wearing burqas or being able to drive automobiles and women's rights, all those type of topics. But I just said that Afghanistan's a very feminine culture. Well, that's why I said don't confuse the two. All right? Women's rights or feminine traits or any of that has nothing to do with this index. This index has to deal with the types of traits that are valued as a society. And that whole idea of nurturing and caring and family is very valued in Afghanistan, extremely valued. Children, every single Afghan cares deeply, deeply for their children. Speaking in generalities, of course. But the point is that those types of traits are very, very valuable to them. They do not care as much about competition. They don't care about the aggression. They don't care about those masculine traits that here in America are more valued. We'll even idolize a tough, take-charge woman that gets into the workplace and becomes a manager, leads a company. You know, the current CEO of Yahoo is a woman, and she has been headlined in various news stories and being hard and take charge and all about competition. That's a masculine trait. That's not feminine. The last one from the original 4 dimensions of national culture is the uncertainty avoidance index. All right, here in the United States, how many people like to go gambling? How many people will go out there and say, you know what, it's going to take everything I got, but I'm going to buy that house? Yeah, but we can barely afford that. Yeah, but I'm banking on that, I am solid in my job for the next 2 years, and I can buy that house, and we'll get enough of it paid off that we're going to be safe even if I do lose my job 2 years down the road. We're taking a risk. Americans love to take a risk. We'll take a gamble. Hey, what's our favorite thing? The Hail Mary pass. Football. Boom, you just launch that thing down there from the 10-yard line. He catches it and boom, into the end zone, and you win in the last 10 seconds. That's what we want to see. You want to see the grand slam in the bottom of the 9th inning. You want to see that team win. That's what we're all about in America, taking chances. Other countries in this world do not believe the same thing. They want a sure bet. They want to avoid uncertainty. Country that I researched, Poland. They are high on the uncertainty avoidance index. They don't want to take risks. And there are reasons why the country and the culture have become that way now. When you look at all 4 of these indexes, you have to think about what has happened over the last 10, 20, 50, 100 years within this society that has made their culture fall where it does on the indexes right now. All right. Last one I'm going to talk about, and this is the fifth dimension that was added later, and this is the long-term orientation. Time orientation. What do we mean when we're talking about time orientation? Well, here in the United States, we can have a major news story break. Within this last few months, we had the Boston bombing after the Boston Marathon, and that was a very big news story for 5 to 7 days, and then it fell out of the public consciousness. We moved on to the next thing. And this happens repeatedly in our society. We are always the next news story, the next occurrence, the next gossip, rumor, whatever's happening right now. This is the way our society is. And we focus very much on weeks to maybe 1 or 2 years. Other societies in this world, other cultures, they look at things in decades or centuries. They have a very long-term orientation, very, very long amount of time that they divide things up into. Case in point, Chinese culture, look at dynasties that lasted hundreds of years. They don't think of things as what's next month, what's next year. They think in much, much larger blocks of time. That's the way they view the world. They view it differently than we do. There are no rights or wrongs to any of these indexes, but it's how people perceive the world around them. What is valued, what is not? How do we mark time? How do we mark success? How accepting we are of different levels within our society and our culture? Wrap this up as far as Professor Hofstede and what I learned going through my master's and my bachelor's degrees programs. These indexes, this is an outside source that you can use to prepare when deploying downrange, when dealing with another culture. And if you look into his research, it's actually available online through his website. You can actually take one culture and compare it to another one and see where there are huge differences in indexes. Like I said, my research was on the United States versus Poland. And I looked at his research and looked at his indexes. And power distance was pretty much the same. Masculine versus femininity, a little bit of difference. Long-term orientation, a little bit of difference. But I found a much, much bigger difference between the two of us in individualism versus collectivism and the uncertainty avoidance. So, if I was going to Poland and I was going to spend 6 months there doing a project or being stationed there or doing some sort of TDY trip, those would probably be factors that I would want to know about before I went. That's probably something I would want to know about their culture before I went over there, to do my mission.
Another challenge to advisors in other countries is getting used to how people view time. In the U.S., we tend to be very focused on what's called clock time. If someone says they're going to show up at 0800, we expect them to show up at 0800. Especially in the military, it's very important to be on time or early. In many countries around the world, time is much more flexible. People aren't so focused on clock time. And if something else comes up, they may or may not show up for that meeting at that specific time. It doesn't necessarily mean they're being rude or irresponsible. It means that their culture has a different orientation to time. Now, let's hear what some experts have to say.
If you say to a group, "What does it mean to be on time?" they'll say back to you, "Oh, wow, you can't be more than 5 minutes late." If it's an extremely important business meeting, you can't be 2 seconds late. If it's a very important meeting in the military, you can't be 2 seconds late. You have to be 5 minutes early. And so time is pretty precisely defined in the United States. And you have to be there, quote, on time. And in the United States, we have lots of different phrases about time that have nothing to do with time being for life. We often say time is money. We talk about having quality time. We talk about having work time. We differentiate that from play time. We have all kinds of words that suggest that time is to be used efficiently and productively to get the task done. And so our time orientation is very related to our task orientation. We want to get the job done. We want to get it done well, and there's nothing wrong with that. In other cultures that build their tasks around relationships and connections and collectives and groups, time becomes involved with the group and with the collectivity.
So in some cultures, especially cultures that are much more task focused, because they have these 15-minute windows of which things get done, they're often seen as very impatient. And in fact, that's seen often as very childish and immature. The US has a very short history, a little over 200 years. Other cultures that have 5, 6, 7,000 years of history, they have a saying in China that said, if you want to know where you're going, look in the rearview mirror. So there's a sense that history is what will tell us what will happen. There are repeating patterns that occur over and over again. If you come in the middle of this or at the very end of the story and say, I can change this and we can make this happen now, those hearing this don't believe that because they have a long historical perspective that you don't have the benefit of.
The advice I have for Americans working in collectivist countries like Kenya is when scheduling your plans and the programs, think about having a margin of safety with regard to the time. Don't be too strict to the time. Just know that they won't get there in time. And pretty much some of the reasons is not because of their own volition. It's the structures that are there, the infrastructure, the communication system, the roads. And so it is important to anticipate, give a margin of safety with regard to your expectations.
One of the host national soldiers said he wasn't interested in theory or planning. He was interested in doing something practical. To say to them, today is Tuesday, and on Friday we're going to jump into our trucks and drive to the depot, going to pick up our uniforms, come back and distribute them in this manner. It was so far out of their comprehension because it was only Tuesday. How could we be talking about Friday? It's only Tuesday.
Some researchers say that some cultures are more present-oriented than future-oriented. Of course, there are exceptions, but generally speaking, Americans tend to be very future-oriented. Most of us are comfortable making plans and feel like it helps us stay organized and on task. However, in many cultures, the American preoccupation with the future and with planning seems like a waste of time. They would rather be doing than planning. If something happens, you take care of it. You don't sit down and plan. Why waste valuable time with that? You can see that there's no right or wrong here. It's just different depending on the culture and the context.
Through a U.S. lens, Iraqi planning appears underdeveloped and reactive. Viewed from the other direction, U.S. planning processes seem overly complex and time-consuming. The Iraqi army system is flexible and responsive, and it works well at lower echelons. An Iraqi battalion can respond quickly to a new threat or situation. A senior U.S. officer observed an Iraqi unit depart 5 minutes after being notified of a hostage situation. In less time than it would have taken a typical U.S. unit to complete the abbreviated military decision-making process, the Iraqi army unit had killed the kidnappers and released the hostages.
This former advisor makes a good point. There are trade-offs to planning versus reacting to contact. If your counterparts are more present-oriented than future-oriented, reacting may solve short-term problems at the expense of long-term stability.
All right, gentlemen, I just got done talking to the students about Gert Hofstede, about some of the dimensions of national culture, looking at power distance index, looking at individualism versus collectivism, looking at masculinity versus femininity, uncertainty avoidance, and long-term orientation. Even showed them a short video about time orientation, how that differs between cultures. Now, in my own experiences from being in Afghanistan, Kuwait, Kyrgyzstan, I got to see a lot of these different indexes and what certain aspects of society would be different compared to here in the United States in our own culture. I've even seen how these indexes vary within our own American culture.
That's very true.
I mean, the way things are in the southern states versus the Northeast versus the Midwest where we are versus the West Coast, right. You could argue that a lot of these indexes apply within our own individual cultures.
And to be quite honest with you, I was an advisor to Saudi Arabia in 2000, 2001. and I spent a year there advising a Saudi colonel in a medical brigade. And I had a quick trip to Fort Bragg, kind of a week-long shake and bake kind of thing. About the only cultural training that we received back in those days was some of the things that were just completely off base. You know, the thing about showing your feet and things like that, they were useless. I really wish that if someone would have told me about Gert Hofstede's work prior to going, because it would have certainly helped me at least integrate into the society that I was trying to help advise. Truly ran into that, especially with the time, as you saw in the film, that time piece. I mean, that was so frustrating because since we were lieutenants, were trained and beaten about the head and neck about if you're on time, then you're late. You know, on time is 10 minutes early. And, you know, every meeting that we ever scheduled with some of our counterparts, they may be late, they may not be late, they may not show up at all. And it was frustrating. And we thought that it was a slight, and it was not. It was a culturalism and something that would have been useful for us to know. And we figured it out while we were there. I mean, we weren't complete idiots. But you know, when we first got there and first started working with our counterparts, it was very frustrating because we ran into some of these things that Hofstede talked about, the uncertainty and avoidance. It's extremely sensitive in Saudi culture, as in most of the Middle East. If you guys have found out in your trips to Iraq and Afghanistan, there is a real fear about not just, as you talked about, betting on the game or the Hail Mary pass or things like that, but just being in a social situation that might cause them an embarrassment.
That's
that was
a
one of the
huge thing.
things that I learned very quickly dealing with the Saudi officer was you never put them in a situation that might cause them any type of a public
humiliation.
Right. I mean, you know, in our society and especially in the military, I mean, you know, as a colonel talking to a major and you made a mistake, man, I'm going to skin you alive for it.
Right.
You expect that, though. You expect that your boss, you know, you're going to get a little bit of a, you know, and you learn from that. Okay, the boss kind of took me to the woodshed on that one, and you know, we kind of let that go. Well, at least we should let that go. And then I learned from that mistake, and I'm not going to do that again. You can't ever do that in some of these other societies because it has a completely different context.
And I think it goes back to that hierarchical, historical, you know, data. You know, societies were built on that, and it's carried over to
on that
today.
Collectivism.
Right.
Yeah.
And the power distance. I mean, how willing you are to accept
and you
that.
made a great point there in that some cultures, it is completely out of their ability to even comprehend why a captain would be speaking to a colonel. They think that is complete chaos on our part. How would you ever, you know, you could argue that it was some type of a caste system or something like that. And right or wrong, it's not ours to debate. But
Well, it depends your perception and
but
your
it's there.
point of view.
Yeah, and it is their perception, and it is what it is, and it's something that we need to understand and be able to work with, work through, work around. But it's there. You're not going to change that. That is how they've been for, like the video said, in some situations, thousands of years. And you're an advisor there for how long? 12 months.
Right. Well, and you know what I thought was interesting, you've probably had this experience as well downrange, there are certain things, you know, there are no right or wrongs to any of these because it is a give and take to all of it. I know when I was in Afghanistan, we had a situation develop and needed to respond to it. Well, the Afghan National Army, who had totally adopted American ways of doing things and MDMP and all the rest of that, and I was dealing with the Corps headquarters, it took them 3 weeks to be able to go through the whole MDMP process, work everything out, get enough supplies, all the rest before they could actually launch.
So you're saying a typical CGSC student.
The Afghan National Police, on the other hand, they had not been made to, they had not adapted American Army ways of doing things, which was good anyway. They were a police force, they weren't an army. However, when that situation developed, within 3 hours they were out the door. So it was the difference between 3 weeks and 3 hours. Now, is there a time for very deliberate planning? There is. I mean, in the mission command block, that is explored at length. However, there are other times when you need to be able to react quickly. So, one method over another, one perception of the world around you, there's a positive and a minus to each.
Well, and I think part of that is because growing up here in the United States, I think we make a bad fallacy in our judgment that the rest of the world is like us.
Oh, it's, yeah.
Right.
And I think, especially the very first time I ever left the United States to go somewhere, I was Desert Shield, Desert Storm in 1991, and my first trip to the Middle East, the first of many, and you don't have anything else to judge anything by. You don't have a yardstick yet. You don't have Hofstede's guidance. You don't have PAMISI PT or ASCOPE. None of that stuff existed back then, and you're just thrown in the mix. And unfortunately, the only yardstick that you do have is the one that you were born with. Okay, I mean, I'm from north central Kansas. I went to school in Kansas. I mean, I was a lieutenant in the Army. I didn't have a lot of experience. And when you look at
so you got the world according to Brad.
The world according to Brad. I mean, you remember the class on mission command, and when we talk about your commander's experiences, training, and education. Well, as a lieutenant, you don't have a lot of that yet. You're still building that rucksack. You're still putting things in there. And unfortunately, you get overseas and you make that mistake that, well, you're all you think like we do. Well, then you find out, well, they don't. And there's a strong collectivism in a lot of parts of the world. That one slide showed, or on the video showed the pie chart, that actually those of us that have that individualistic thought process are in the world's minority. And a lot of people look at us Americans and go, why are you so damn selfish? Right. And we're not. It's just the way that our culture has evolved in the last couple of hundred years with the movement through the Western frontier and the ability to have to, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps and stuff.
And we always try to, especially in the U.S. military, and we go to these other countries, force our way in.
Yes.
Make it work our way.
Well, do you remember the discussion that was that we had on bringing democracy to Iraq? And then there was this big debate about, well, they're not doing it right. And I had to laugh because I thought, well, what you're going to get is a Iraqi version of democracy. And you're right, it's not going to look like American democracy because they have, and if you look back, that culture goes back thousands of years, and it is going to look a little bit different. But arguably, it would work for them. Might not work for us. In fact, in some situations, it might make us very uncomfortable with some of the things that they do. But again, we're looking through it, with our American glasses on, and Mr. Hofstede, like I said, I wish I would have read some of his work 20 years ago.
Well, and this was my bread and butter for when I was in school and learning about this. I remember at the time, I was in Afghanistan. I was finishing my master's degree online. And part of it was, you had various topics you could pick from and write about. And what I chose to write about in one of my papers was about sweatshops. And I wrote about what is the American perception of a sweatshop. I mean, there's lots of different definitions out there. There's one from the, Department of Labor at the federal level. A lot of people in the United States have their own definition of it. There have been people who have been out in the streets that believe minimum wage should be $15 an hour. So there's various different definitions, but we have the American idea of what a sweatshop is. And the American idea is, by law, you're working over 40 hours a week without getting extra pay. You're
12 years old.
12 years old, child labor laws, the ideas of making less than the mandated minimum wage. And then you go overseas, and, I remember Afghans on our camp or in other areas that I'd run into, not working for us, but Afghans that were working in a civilian capacity for someone or working for the Afghan government or whatever else. Say you had an individual who was working a 10-hour day and would get paid $4. By the American standard, that is a sweatshop. That is an individual who's being taken advantage of. but that's our standard. You have to take into account, what is the cost of living over there? What are the job opportunities over there? What did this guy or gal, before getting this $4 a day job, what were they earning? I mean, people forget that not too long ago in our own society, individuals were working 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, for a couple bucks. And that was it. You go back to the Industrial Revolution, you go back 100 years ago, our society had to go through that. That was part of developing. That was part of going from an agriculturally based society through the industrial, and now we'd be an information society because we've been gone beyond the industrial. You're not going to take a very agrarian-based society like Afghanistan that's gone through 30 years of devastation and expect them to pop out the other side with everybody getting paid $50,000 a year jobs. It doesn't happen.
And Korea's the same way.
Oh, yeah.
You look at Korea now, they're like almost leading the world in information.
Yeah. I remember.
But where were they in the 60s and 70s?
Well, and I remember someone telling me not too long ago, a few years ago, that it was when the Hyundais started first being imported here to the United States. And we all remember what those first ones looked like. I mean, they were a new car company, and the quality was kind of iffy and things. And then and someone said, they will surpass Honda someday.
And they sure have.
They are there. And they did
you.
that in just a generation. And again, we have to be very careful about judging other cultures. And I kind of like what Hofstede was talking about as far as this is just an ability to measure and maybe also to identify some of the friction points when you're dealing with some of the things that cultures, and we talk about clash of cultures. In fact, there's a guy that's written a book on that, and I'm not going to hawk the book or anything, but you can look it up if you'd like to. But there's a lot of different theories out there as far as what different societies value and how they process. We talked about how they just simply processing information and what's important. The family collective or my own personal success. Things like that, and where those friction points may lie, and other areas where there won't be any issues. I mean, most societies value family. Okay, I can't think of one off the top of my head that does not value family. But when in the video when they were talking about the difference between Americans and that East African village where most Americans can maybe possibly name 50 aunts and uncles and cousins and brothers and sisters.
If they're lucky.
If they're lucky.
50's a lot.
Yeah, 50's a lot. And
to us.
And in our society, that you're certainly right. That is. But we're also a very mobile society, and we tend to lose touch with folks and all that stuff. But in this particular village, in this example, I about fell out of my chair when the professor said 400.
And they're doing that without social media.
400. Right. Without the aid of iPhones, Facebook, Twitter,
personal
yada,
interaction.
yada, yada, yada. And you're exactly right. Now, and a lot of that stuff is passed on through conversations and things like that, where people actually have to speak to other people. And in this day and age, I know you guys have teenagers or not, but thankfully my daughter's in her mid-20s now. But she's of that generation. And she talks to me. She's stationed at Fort Bragg now with her husband, and I get text from her all day long. Okay, once in a while a phone call, but that's that generation. That's how they connect. And you have all of this in your head, and then you go to a new culture, and they don't have the cell phone towers. They don't have, I mean, as an American, you go, wow, it's stepping back in time. But from their perspective, they look at us and go, why are you in such a hurry? Where are you going? You waste all this time planning for something that may not happen. And they talked about that in the film. And again, you have to be able to explore each of these perspectives, and not just from an American point of view. Because arguably, we get into that, well, right or wrong, American, all this stuff. It's not that. It's understanding where we are in the world.
All right, we got to see a couple of little videos on the female engagement teams, and there's some that's developed out of the last 10 years, although I would say arguably the Army has had this kind of idea going around for decades now, back to World War II. There's just some really important things about the female engagement teams, and that's why it's really important to highlight them, because they've been able to accomplish so much. One of my favorite examples of what's going on with the female engagement teams now is that, the Taliban have actually, when we're dealing in Middle Eastern countries, we're very respectful of the culture, and they have no problem using their culture against us. And so a member of the Taliban tries to sneak through a checkpoint into a secure key leader engagement dressed as a woman. Well, wasn't able to do that because there was a female engagement team there checking each woman as she came in there. And so he gets arrested, and the Afghan National Army leads him out of there in front of everybody in plain view in his dress. I just thought that was such a great way to show how the female engagement teams, the kind of effect they've had, because you look at the slide, and I think it's these 4 key points. They really are a tactical weapons system, and commanders need to think and employ them in that manner. They're like any other tactical weapon. You can't just throw them together. They are an enabler. They're a force multiplier. When you're dealing in other cultures, there are societal rules. Having those female engagement teams there to be able to engage with the women and with the children in whatever village, town, city that you're in, it's a significant enabler to you. Also, it facilitates the completion of the mission. And I remember one case in point where, the female engagement team got to know the women and the children in this town, and we're spending time with them, teaching them little games and all the rest of that. Well, the women ended up telling the soldiers on the female engagement team where 3 insurgents were hiding out in the town. They built that trust and that rapport that, male warfighters, combat arms, infantry, armor, FA types, we cannot do that. And the last point is it's a capability. These women soldiers who are on FET teams go through 24 weeks of training. It is a capability, it is a skill set. It is very, very difficult to get onto a FET team, and they are professionals. They know what they're doing.
Here's what I find absolutely amazing about these FETs, is that when I was in Baghdad in 2003, fairly early, in fact, we were right on the heels of the 3rd Infantry Division when they went in for the takedown, and the kind of the chaos that happened after that. And as we struggled with what the next mission was going to be, and some of the, if you all remember in the news with the looting and a lot of the chaos that was going on, we really struggled with how to try to establish some type of security and provide some safety and all this kind of stuff. And it was extremely difficult. The vast majority of all military units are male. There were times when I still remember we would get missions to send, and we had to kind of pull through the medical company in the brigade to find female medics in order to send someplace to help assist with certain things. We were beginning to understand some of these cultural issues while we were there. But what I find amazing is the fact that the Army got this right, in my mind, and they invested into this. And the thing that's amazing is, as you said, it's a 24-week training process. This isn't a shake and bake where you go to Fort Riley for a week.
So many have done.
And you know, the Army got this one right in my mind. And as you said earlier with the bullets and things about being force multipliers and things like that, but it goes back to what we talked about earlier about having these female engagement teams in the communities with the Afghan women and children, building that trust, building those teams, and all that kind of stuff, so that we get the, you know, I hate to use the term intelligence gathering and things like that, because I think that was kind of a byproduct of what was going on, but it certainly didn't hurt, you know. But they understand that culture, because
it goes back to building the team.
Yeah, and as you alluded to,
the
enemy was using their culture against us,
and them.
And once we were able to put these teams in place and begin to build the trust and build all this teamwork and stuff, I mean, it really put a damper on the Taliban's ability to infiltrate these different events and things like that. And as you said, some of the Afghan women were now ratting these guys out. Hey, he's in this house. He's here. He's the one that set the IED. How do you know? Well, he's the cousin of my brother's sister's brother. You know, and again, it goes back to that collective, family-oriented. You know, they all know each other. And the thing is, when you have a stranger show up in a village, they know that.
Oh yeah.
And they understand that guy's probably not here to hand out candy to the kids, okay? And they know these things, but because of the differences in our cultures and the different barriers that we have between the men and the women and things like that with the different cultures, and we talked about the friction points and things, you know, it's very difficult for us to go in there and kind of bring these barriers down to where to a workable level where we can reach across and get some of these things done. They want peace and security, so do we. But because of these different ways we have of the way our societies and cultures work, it would behoove us to understand. And that's why I said that this FET stuff was I thought it was a brilliant idea.
Well, one of the other things I think is really important here is I remember when I was deployed, as far as a situation where you needed a FET team member or you needed a FET, well, the idea was, well, we've got a couple female soldiers over there, just send them over there and have them talk to them. Just, yeah, we got a couple, you know, just put them over there. They can do it. They can do the search. Commanders and leaders don't understand this is a skill set, and that's why I said this is a
most
tactical
of these team members
weapon
were
system.
hand-picked, were they not? I mean,
you have to volunteer. You have to make it through the 24 weeks. You're going to get training from SOF. They are highly trained, skilled individuals to be part of this team.
They go through a lot of culture training, a lot of weapons training. These teams are actually extremely proficient, and they do a lot more than just, you know, go into villages and hold babies and things. I mean, this is an extremely talented skill set that we've developed here.
Right, we're not just taking people out of the S1
You
shop
can't do that.
or
You can't
supplies,
you just
know,
can't walk up and go,
cage.
you know, I need you to go downtown. You know, that it's not that soldier, that female soldier isn't going to give it her best shot, but she certainly doesn't have that 24-week background that's going to enable her to do a good job. I mean, she, you know, maybe, you know, like myself from central Kansas that I've never met anybody outside of my own state until I joined the Army in the 80s and you know, got to understand that not everybody thinks like we do.
Well,
so
and you bring up a really
imagine
important,
that.
you bring up an important point too, because I remember this from downrange. As part of the training, it's not only interacting with the women in the other country and interacting with the children and all the rest of that. What about interacting with the males? Because I've seen that before. We had a female lieutenant who went over to the Afghan side when I was there, and she's sitting there dealing with Afghan female police officers, but then thinks she can walk right up to the general and start talking to him because she's an American officer. That did not go over well at all. Because if you're going to play on this side of the fence, all of a sudden you think you're going to, it doesn't work that way.
And again, it's not a slight on the female officer
she
being
wasn't
female,
trained.
but she didn't understand what she had just done, which was kind of a violation of something in their culture.
And she wasn't part of a Fed team. She wasn't trained for that.
But, you know, and this goes back to that what you talked about with that distance factor, as far as, you know, an Afghan general is not used to talking to anybody that is not close to his rank, if not his rank. So it doesn't matter if it's an American or a female or what it is. I mean, that's just not something that you do in their society.
Right. But since she lost face there and that became an issue, guess who was not going back over the next day and dealing with the Afghan females and the police because they didn't want to talk to her anymore because she just
risk avoidance.
Now you lost
so
their
she
trust,
kind of
now you
violated
gotta
two of
read.
those things of Hofstede's indexes there by doing a simple act, something that she didn't even think, I bet she didn't even give it a second thought. Walked up to talk to this guy and put herself in a very difficult predicament because of the two of the four, actually five indexes that she had suddenly crossed. Probably didn't even know it at the time.
Yeah, and you know, you just and the members of the FETs, they go through all this training and they learn about all these things, and they become cognizant of it's all about trying to accomplish the mission.
Right.
You don't get upset about things. You know, as a male over in Afghanistan, I couldn't sit there and walk up to every female Afghan police officer and just start talking to her about this, that, or the other. I did not get upset about that. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. It is their country. I learned their ways. I learned what they were extremely good at and what things we were extremely good at, and that whole comparative advantage and working together. And I didn't take anything personally, and that's why it went from an hour a day to 12 hours a day over there and living with them and being, and when you start realizing all that stuff, and that's why they have to have all this training to be able to fulfill this mission role, and that's why they are a tactical weapons system.
Before we leave the subject of cultural frameworks, let's talk about what a smart card is. Many of you may have been deployed and been given a smart card on your way to your deployment area. A smart card is a very small, portable, region-specific tool that you can use to assess the culture in which you're going to be going to. It's very basic, very brief, but it contains a lot of information that can be very important as you assess and analyze the culture. The smart card is basically something that is a quick reference tool, and it has all the various components that we talked about, and it basically is all of the various culture domains that you see here today.
The Iraqis were very upset that we had dismantled their army, and in the end, I agreed with them. They said that the old army had some bad people in it, but the majority of them were soldiers first. If we had left the army standing, none of what they were going through now would have happened because they said the army would have controlled it. We should have gotten rid of the top people and rooted out the bad people, but as they said, we instead rooted out everybody, destroyed their structure, and then decided that anyone who was against Saddam would work well in the new army. What they said we didn't understand was that some of those people were murderers and thugs and bad people. We wound up picking some of those very bad people for leadership positions just because they were against Saddam or Saddam didn't like them. We were told that the army might never recover from some of the selections we made.
All right, this last little video segment I find very interesting because this one highlights one individual's opinion that the U.S. Army, the U.S. government made a mistake here, that our decision-making process was not the best, and that some of the decisions we made following the invasion of Iraq in 2003. Now, I myself, I wasn't in Iraq. I'm an Afghan veteran, but I know both of you gentlemen were in Iraq. And what's your take from what you saw in this video?
Well, I mean, shoulda, coulda, woulda. I mean, the policy is what the policy is, and you know, you just have to make the best of it. Now, again, it goes back to empathy. You have to be able to listen to them and figure out, okay, they have an immense amount of knowledge and background, more than we do. You have to be empathetic to that. You have to be able to listen to some of their grievances, and then try to do your best you can to kind of navigate. And with this particular case, hey, listen, if they have a problem with these guys in a leadership position, listen to that, and then see what the best course of action is. Develop a course of action with them, put their face on it to move forward.
Does this strike you as kind of like a hindsight's 2020? I mean, I get the message of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but come on, an invasion just took place. How, everybody always say, oh, well, you should have done it this way, you should have done it that way.
You remember when in 2006 the book Fiasco came out?
Yep.
And it seemed like the book Fiasco addresses that that's one of the main contentions amongst some others. And if you remember, as I do, before we went in the second time, how Paul Wolfowitz would fight with General Shinseki at the time, and General Shinseki said, we need this many soldiers, we need these things, and he was kind of marginalized in my opinion. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people agree with what he said. People had similar observations, and totally agree with what this guy said and what he observed.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lesson to be learned there. I mean, no one is perfect, and it is unfair to do the whole hindsight 2020. But there is a lesson to be learned, and I know that after World War II, that was actually one of their big points of contention, because depending on which area you were in, some of them were keeping the
high Nazis.
Yeah, they were keeping the administrators
Right.
there because
Absolutely.
it was keeping everything going. They didn't immediately cashier everybody. So there's something to be learned from that.
Yeah, you can't just willy-nilly dismantle the bureaucracy.
Before we leave the subject of cultural domains and the cultural framework, we just spent some time developing a smart card. As you know, the smart card is a very small, portable tool that's very region-specific, and it's meant to be a very brief and basic tool that you can use. Many of you will have seen these as you deployed. Many of you will have used these before. So the smart card is one of those very, very important tools that you can use to take with you. Now, how did we derive the information that we use to develop a smart card? Well, we do so through research. And research is a very large and broad topic. But research is where we collect that secondhand data collection. Research can take a variety of forms, and we conduct research in a variety of ways. There are many sources of information outside conducting observation and interacting with locals in which we can gather our information. Books, well, books are a good way to gather information, however, they quickly become obsolete. We also have the internet, quick, fast, immediate. However, the internet can also give us misinformation as well. So we have to be very careful to identify the reference from which that information from the internet was taken. Films are also a great way to provide examples of the local populace, examples of the culture, and it's a wonderful way to assess the situation that you're going into. However, depending upon current events, that film could change dramatically. Again, the smart cards, which are something that you can use from Tradout Culture Center. The smart cards are also available on the CIA Fact Book. One of the other areas where we can get information of research is the U.S. State Department. And of course, past experiences and our past training. That absolutely is a great way to get information because obviously we are a sum of our events and our experiences in life. So using that past training, using that past experience, and also what you have heard from other soldiers in similar situations is also a good way to collect secondhand data. We also have subject matter experts, or SMEs. They are a great source of research because they are very honed in to their area of expertise. They have what's considered expert analysis in their field of study. So using a subject matter expert for your research and conducting that research is an excellent tool.
Sometimes I noticed that the team leader I work with was always frustrated because Iraqis are not very responsive. The Iraqis would say that they would do something, and they don't deliver it when they say they will. They would say, okay, we will give you this report tomorrow. They don't. That is because of several reasons. One is that they are not used to this fast-paced kind of work. So one of the major things is that they are still operating under the mentality of a centralized system, the one that they operated under for the last 35 years. It is now more decentralized, but they just don't do it. Americans don't understand that. They think that, oh, now you are decentralized. You should just do things faster. They don't. Iraqis don't. They have to take permission from their supervisor and the supervisor from his supervisor, and that will take forever. So American will think that people are not very productive. They don't want to do work, so they always try to present this as an individual thing, but it is not.
All right, so we just saw that video. Obviously, the opinion given by an Iraqi interpreter or someone else who's dealing with the Iraqi forces probably happened sometime 2, 3, 4 years ago. I know that when I was overseas in Afghanistan, I saw this same kind of response. What was your take on that short little video?
Actually, I can use a couple of personal experiences. One, when I was in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia in 2000, 2001 as an advisor, also dealing with the Middle Eastern culture. Again in Baghdad in 2003, they almost mirror each other. And as we talked about the professor's indicators, and this is a great one. I mean, this is this whole concept of time. And, you know, great Americans, you know, if you're 5 minutes early, you're 10 minutes late kind of concept, and how much did you get done today, Lieutenant? And unfortunately, their concept of time is vastly different than ours. And we talked about those friction points in the different cultures and things. And I would argue that this one is probably the one that will set an American off the quickest. We just do not understand, and that leads to a lot of frustration and a lot of misconceptions on our part that well, that culture is just inherently lazy. Well, no, they're not. They are.
It's just a different way of doing things.
It's a different way of doing things. I would, yeah, and I think it's incumbent upon us, being on their soil, that we take that extra step to understand how that impacts what we're trying to do with them. I mean,
yeah, I've had the opportunity to work with particularly Iraqi forces in context of the video we just saw. And I had a counterpart that once told me that Westerners live to work, we work to live. And, you know, you have to be empathetic. It goes back into the mission command block again that we've already talked about, but you have to be empathetic, and you have to understand at the end of the day, the mission's going to get accomplished. It's just that they have a different nature and a different perspective on how to do business.
well, and you could take
And
this and
you can't just Western, you know, everybody wants, you can't go in with the mentality that, listen, we're going to make these guys the United States Army overnight. It's just not going to happen.
have any of you guys been to Japan?
No.
No.
Their mentality of when you mentioned live to work or work to live, that's what popped into my head. Some of those guys in the corporate world will not bulk or blink at a 16 to 18 hour day, 7 days a week. That's just the way it is. If you're going to succeed in corporate business structure, that's the effort you have to put in. And you know, you think Americans are a little high strung about working and deadlines and accomplishments and goals, objectives, and things like that. It's amazing as you look through all the different cultures as far as, because almost every one of them has a different concept of time. I mean, you mentioned the Chinese measuring time in dynasties.
Yep.
You know, we measure time, it was mentioned in clock time, minutes and seconds. The Chinese made the comment about, well, the first bird seen is the first bird killed. Mm-hmm. Americans look at that and go, that's the first bird across the finish line.
Yeah, early bird gets the worm, you know, out the door
early
first.
Bird, exactly.
So
it is truly, I think, when we looked at Hofstad's indicators, I think this was the one that I think most cultures really tend to be all over the map on, no pun intended, but I think this is the one that, especially when you come from a society like ours that is just, hell-bent on getting as much done in a 24-hour period as you
Right.
can, and measuring that as your own personal success, leads to a lot of frustration, at least early in your career as an advisor.
Sure. Yep.
As we review the pieces of research that we have collected when conducting our research analysis, we need to be very careful, as we learned in our leadership lessons, the aspect of confirmation bias and anchoring, that we're not wedded to a specific issue based upon our own worldview perspective and our own personal and cultural biases. So we need to free our mind and be very clear when we're taking in those pieces of research that we look at them to the extent that they are pure and they're simple, and take it in that vein rather than applying our own cultural knowledge to it, or rather than applying our own perspective on that specific set of research. As we look at what's considered framing, we can take a variety of news articles as an example here, and we can look at 3 different news sources. This is an example of 3 different news articles. They're all the same event. This was a protest in Bahrain in 2011. And the protesters were primarily Shia. They were protesting for better treatment and better rights against the Sunni monarchy. And what you'll see here is 3 different articles. One is from American News Source. The second is from the Shia News Organization. And the third is a Gulf News Organization. And I want you, as you review these, to consider the tone of the articles and the words used to describe the actual event in all 3 of these articles.
Yes, I deployed to Afghanistan as a platoon leader with the 82nd, Iraq as a company executive officer with the 82nd. We were responsible for Fallujah, conducting combat operations. All the time.
What was that like?
It was a challenge. We were in there relatively shortly after the invasion, and the local populace didn't yet know what to think about us. We were still trying to figure out how we were going to influence the population with projects and money. It was kind of a challenging area that we just hadn't been 100% prepared for, but we never are prepared for everything. Well, at that point, the battle space had not been really fully secured, and so there had been some, during the invasion and the initial push, there were some negative activities that had taken place with other members of the U.S. Army, and so we were also there providing additional combat power with the 82nd. We had more boots, and the other Americans that had been there in near Fallujah had not yet. They were armor, or they were mechanized units. They didn't have as many people in that same concentrated area. So it was we were placed into this situation. We were given money, and we were given the ability to try to come up with some solutions, figure out what the problems were, in 2003, it was a dynamic environment where we were still trying to figure out what sort of programs, what sort of activities we could do, as well as which ones actually made a difference.
I'm Sergeant Ashley Torres. Soldiers train for war, and now they prepare for peace. The Leadership Development and Education for Sustained Peace, or LDESP, aims to teach officers the history and culture of conflicted regions before their boots hit the ground. Instructors from the Naval Postgraduate School teach the class in Monterey, California.
I hope they'll take away the difficulty of the challenge, and also a sense that the challenge is by no means impossible and the war can be won.
Officers from 8 NATO countries with orders to deploy attended the event in Grafenwehr, Germany. The class focused on Afghanistan and the unique situations commanders face on the front lines. For more information on this and other stories, go to the Army's homepage at www.army.mil.
As we consider worldview and perspective, worldview can basically be described as a comprehensive outlook on life, or our view of life. It is a framework comprised of our knowledge, our beliefs, and our points of view. Perspective is also considered interchangeable with point of view. But understanding the worldview within a culture is critical because it's a very important part of conducting an analysis of that culture. And it's important to mission success because if we can understand the worldview of a culture, we may be able to predict human behaviors. We may be able to predict patterns of behavior. Those that are part of the same culture all subscribe to the same worldview because they have the same beliefs, the same knowledge, the same experiences, and they share those similar worldviews. They also will share the similar perspectives.
Experienced military personnel deployed overseas have reported that being able to understand what host nationals are thinking and feeling has helped them with personal safety and mission success. These skills make up what is known as perspective taking and will be the focus of this training. Research on perspective taking has shown that people who are skilled perspective takers tend to resolve conflict better, negotiate better outcomes, and engage in less stereotyping of other people. In this curriculum, you'll hear stories from U.S. soldiers deployed all over the world. Listen to the following story and see if you can figure out why this host national officer acted the way he did.
We had a mission going outside our base, going out the back gate and down south. We drew maps on the ground because we were going to show the right way to do it. We rehearsed everything. Then we had the colonel in charge lead the rehearsal. He went through the rehearsal perfectly. He backbriefed it very, very well. Then we went outside the wire. That's when it got crazy. Once we got outside the wire, he had no intention of doing what we had rehearsed. That was a dog and pony show he put on for us. He was making it up as we went along. He had us leave our backs completely exposed. We only got shot at a little on that mission. Thankfully, it didn't turn into a big firefight.
These situations are common, especially in cross-cultural interactions. We often don't know why other people act as they do, think as they do, or feel as they do. Compare your ideas about why the colonel did what he did with the explanation you're about to hear.
This happened because we had inserted ourselves into his command cycle and forced him to do a rehearsal he didn't see as being linked to what was going to happen outside the wire. We had taken away the opportunity for him to do his own planning. He's a commander. We can't tell him what to do because he's a commander. He doesn't take guidance from anybody. So when we got outside the wire, he was just doing everything off the cuff, and we completely lost control. He lost control as a commander, and when we got back in the wire, he blamed it on us because we hadn't provided him the time to prepare.
You can see how costly it is when you don't bother to think about other points of view or are inaccurate in taking their perspective. When you do understand the perspectives of others, you can use that knowledge to attain your personal and professional goals.
My name's Hunter Gelbach. I'm an assistant professor of education here at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and my interest is in social perspective taking. Particularly, I'm interested in how we figure out what other people are thinking and feeling. We engage in this act of trying to figure out what other people are thinking and feeling sort of automatically sometimes. Other times it's much more effortful and takes a lot of mental effort and energy to try and figure someone out. Whether you're working with a superior officer or a subordinate, being able to take their perspective is going to be particularly useful in facilitating that relationship. For military settings, whether you're working with host nationals, whether you're working with NGOs in a foreign country, trying to learn those countries' norms and interact with the people there. Even when you're working with a multinational force, you've got soldiers from many different countries who are going to adhere to different norms and different rules. Being particularly motivated and accurate in your perspective taking is likely to keep you safer across a wide range of situations. So whether you're on patrol or walking through a marketplace, being able to get a good read on the people that you interact with is going to be critical to keeping you and your troops safe. In a one-on-one negotiation with an important person from a very different community is also going to be critical to working out deals that are beneficial for both sides. Particularly for Americans, people from other countries often have a stereotype of us that we don't put a lot of effort into trying to understand them or their cultural norms, where they're coming from. And so to the extent that we can do that more, people tend to be a lot more forgiving and a lot more disclosing. And so even if you're not a great perspective taker in the sense of being super accurate, if you show that you're trying, other people are often a lot more willing to disclose information, to be helpful. They get a sense that you're trying and they're likely to reciprocate. And that's only going to serve in a positive way to help towards your mission.
Sometimes the stakes are high, as you heard in the first story. But perspective taking can be useful to you in a broad range of situations. Listen to how perspective taking can impact judgments and fundamentally affect relationships between people.
You know, there's kind of a trend in the Iraqi army. They have soldiers' names on the rolls and they were collecting payroll money. In our case, they were leaving soldiers that were killed in action and some of their wounded in action on the rolls, you know, collecting the pay for these soldiers that either were killed or didn't even exist anymore. We're not talking like hundreds of soldiers, but it was enough. Well, my S1 administrative advisor told me about this, and I looked into it, and then I brought it to the battalion commander. My first inclination was, hey, there's rampant corruption in this battalion. These guys are criminally culpable. They're bilking the United States out of money. We were under the impression that, the United States was paying the bills for this, which, I don't know, may or may not have been the case. So I was pretty adamant about putting a stop to it. Basically, it was a survivors fund. It was a battalion fund that they used to pay because they knew the Iraqi agency was not paying a lot of the bills, and they were supposed to pay survivor benefits to the families. They knew the Iraqis weren't paying them, so what they were doing is they were leaving the dead soldier on the rolls, collecting the money, and then giving his pay to the family. Minus, probably 10%, give or take, of a handling fee, which is standard practice in that part of the world. Also, routinely, soldiers wouldn't get paid. For some reason, their name would get left off the pay roster. So they always had extra monies to ensure everybody in the battalion got pay. And so that was the reason. So that was one of those instances where I was dead wrong and, I had the wrong perspective. I had to get their perspective on it, and after that, it was fine.
Listen to two highly experienced service members report on what perspective-taking skills have done for them.
What I tell people who go out for me into the operational theaters, I tell them that what they're doing out there is a matter of people skills. If you've done this successfully once in a foreign culture, you can probably do it again. It's a matter of being open to the people you talk to, being honest, and being true to yourself, and being willing to learn on a minute-to-minute basis as you're talking to somebody. Observing them, seeing how they're reacting to you, observing your own interactions so that you can make sure that it goes the way you want. There are things that are common around the world. You have to be self-aware and honest enough with yourself so that when you're doing something that isn't working, you stop.
I think that we're finding out now that perspective taking has a beneficial effect on your ability to provide security. It has an effect on your ability to engage the local population and to get their support. It's not just for soldiers who are out there doing projects and helping to rebuild host countries. It's also for soldiers who are in security detachments, who are coming into contact with host nationals every single day. I think it keeps us safer. It's essential.
As you might know, there's an obligatory recruitment in Iraq. For decades, they've seen the khaki uniform, and the Iraqis hate this uniform. When the coalition came as a liberator, they were very happy to bury those uniforms. When American troops in uniform enter a hospital, for many people it's like, what are they doing here? They're combat people. What are they doing here? They didn't realize these are civil affairs folks, and they are here to help with the shortages, and they are doctors and they're nurses. I worked with a physician from the Mayo Clinic who was there to help Iraqi people, but the Iraqi people didn't realize this because he was in uniform. We had to find a solution to overcome this. Since the soldier can't be out of uniform, we asked a tailor to do an arm cuff with a red cross or red crescent, which is what they use more in the Middle East. And they put the arm cuff over the uniform just to show the people that we are medical professionals and we are here to help. Once we figured out their thoughts and took action to make it understandable for them, it was much better.
All right, now this is a little bit of a different video here when you're dealing with what people are wearing and how it has an effect on individuals. I thought it was really interesting, this whole idea of the uniform and people's reaction to it in a medical center with the civil affairs folks and having to put on the armbands. I mean, Mr. Scotsman, what did you take away from that video? I mean,
well, we had similar experiences at the Qasr seaport in Iraq, either the north or the south, where we're clearing cargo, and some of my civilian employees, they're wearing that, what appears to be an Army uniform, and like the customs clearance, the Iraqi customs clearance officials and the other folks, they didn't quite get it. Why is the Army clearing cargo? Why is the Army down here doing what they're doing? And it was just part of the supplementation to get cargo moving off the seaport and move it north to where it needed to go.
So what would have seemed totally normal to us, and we probably wouldn't have paid much attention to the uniforms because we're used to seeing those all the time. I mean, you go to the airport, everybody's got some sort of uniform on. You go to a seaport, same thing.
Well, anywhere in PACOM, UCOM, or back home, NORTHCOM, we're used to it. We got it. You're always going to see folks in that uniform if they work for the military. But it was a foreign concept for the folks in Iraq.
Do you have any experiences with that when you were in Iraq?
What I saw in the video was a display of adapting and getting the mission accomplished. When they see this uniform, folks associate, the killing and the disgustingness of combat. And Mr. Kosman's absolutely right. They changed the armbands, adapted to the mission, and got the mission accomplished.
Yeah, I think it all comes down to, my experiences in Afghanistan was the exact same thing. Sometimes there were things that we were wearing or that we had on our vehicles or something else that we were doing. We had absolutely no idea, but if people are reacting, there's got to be a reason for it. So I would ask the Afghan police that I was with, or maybe the Afghan governance that I was working with, somebody, ask them, why are people reacting this way, and try to get that, because if you're noticing something, ask questions. Not everything that you're going to get in training is going to tell you. Cultures are very, very complicated like our own. And you need to ask those questions to find out, is it something I'm doing? Is it something I'm wearing? Is it the fact that I'm eating in the middle of the day? And you can do that 11 months of the year, but if Ramadan is going on, which is what it's called in Afghanistan, and you're not cognizant of that, that's very, very rude to do in front of them, because they fast during the daytime.
Yep. And that's probably a good leverage point that you can use, or a good segue to get that particular type of information, is your interpreter. Mm-hmm. Your interpreter is not just your guy that helps you convey dialogue, but he's also kind of a cultural advisor. It can help, can pick up on those nuances that you see in different parts of the world. So,
direct observation and cross-cultural interviewing are the best ways to conduct research. With observation, we have to consider situational frames, observation itself, and participant observation. With situational frames, we identified those smallest units of culture, and we took those and we analyzed each individual one. We looked at dialects, you look at situational personalities, you consider certain behavior patterns of those things that you observe. And you look at those in those normal, recognized settings in which they occur. Situational frames include things like eating, drinking, movement within the culture, going to work, going to school, coming home. We look at all of those components, those small units, to identify what makes up the whole, the much larger picture of culture. The best way to approach another culture is to observe them in their natural setting. With observation, you want to remove yourself from being a participant. For direct observation, you want to be able to watch, listen, but you don't necessarily want to make your presence known. Because there are effects of observer presence if you participate as you're doing the observation and conducting observation. It may change the behaviors. It may modify the events. However, with participant observation, that is where you can immerse yourself in the process and in that part of the culture to learn more. And in certain times and in certain areas, participant observation is appropriate. But you need to, again, be careful, because if you notice that your participation modifies the culture's behavior, then you want to remove yourself or pull back, or at least understand that that is having an effect and minimize that as much as possible. With interviewing, we have two types of interviewing. We have open-ended and we also have structured. Open-ended is where you use a variety of questions, and based upon the responses, you can further tailor more open-ended questions. Conversely, structured is where you have a specific set amount of questions that you wish to ask, and they're predetermined. The good thing about this is that you can use that data and it can be statistically tabulated. So with open-ended, you get a lot more qualitative comments, you get qualitative feedback, and with structured, you can get more quantitative data. In addition, you want to make sure that when you're asking both open-ended and structured questions during your interview, you want to make sure that you are avoiding any type of leading questions. You want to avoid using double negatives. And also, if you are using an interpreter, ensure that you are speaking directly to the interviewee and not the interpreter.
Well, I would say some of the basic things about going, you need to know the environment that you're going into. I mean, one, is it a hostile environment, or is it one where people are generally, friendly? Is it a permissive environment? So that's obviously going to change greatly how you approach your preparation for that country. I mean, I spent some time in Africa, went to Rwanda, Ethiopia, Djibouti, places like that where they're relatively safe. I mean, you can go out, you can go to restaurants, you can kind of really do whatever. People are very excited to see Americans, very friendly. Really enjoy talking to you. Surprisingly, everywhere I went, most of them spoke English. Lots of people speak English there. And that's one of the things that we as Americans don't realize sometimes. I mean, I'm sitting here in Rwanda speaking to a sergeant who's the RTO for the battalion, and he speaks 4 languages, I mean, and he's just a brilliant guy. And, he's the RTO. Some of the differences there, things to know. I mean, knowing a few phrases, like you were talking about the little sayings, the Bosnian sayings, those types of things go a long way if you can say good morning to somebody in their language. If you can say goodbye, you say, how are you doing? Or, my name is, whatever. If you can say those types of things, it just shows that, that you care a little bit about what they're doing. If you've got opportunities to go and have dinner with them or do something, or even share some of your culture with them. I mean, they're very, people are very interested in Americans and what they do. And if you take that opportunity to just share and receive what they have to offer too, I mean, it goes a long way. I mean, what it all boils down to is that we're all people, and we like to share, what we're about, and like to learn about things, and like to know about other people's cultures.
Yeah, good comments about the language. Just here in this country, through business, had an opportunity to have lots of members from another culture work with us in a family business. And I intentionally went out of the way to try to learn their language in my own pitiful way, but they certainly appreciated that. And it got me a lot of mileage with them as a group. And I'd have fun. I'd do fun stuff with them. Like I'd say, okay, this is an English day. You get it was Spanish, obviously. No Spanish today, solo inglés. And then we'd have a no English day. It was only Spanish. So it was just a way to kind of maybe being a little bit of a critical thinker and a creative thinker, just trying to crawl into their shoes and understand what the world looked like from their side of the fence. So.
Absolutely.
It was a lot of fun. And you guys probably have similar experiences in your freaking 20 countries you've been to.
I think back at my very pathetic understanding of the Arabic language and how much I studied and I appreciated and I did it. But in the country of Qatar, like all countries, there's certain dialects. And the one word I learned that it's only, you're only going to hear a Qatari say, is a word, it's shida'awa. Now, shida'awa, it's a derogatory way of, borderline derogatory way of saying there is no way on this earth that what you just said is true. And many times in many venues, of course I'm always introduced as the American who doesn't speak Arabic, but in the middle of a conversation when you can read body language and things are obviously not going your way, and you go, Shida'awa. All of a sudden, everybody in that group is convinced I speak very fluent Arabic. I know exactly what's going on, and now the conversation is going to be done in English, and things work out.
Interesting. So that was a little button you knew how to push.
Shida'awa.
Interesting. Knowing your environment. Culturally aware. Major Z?
I would say for me, what I remember most is dealing with the Afghan National Police and picking up as much Dari as I possibly could. I would learn the good morning and the thank you in Pashto, and then I learned a ton of Dari to the point where I was able to form some small sentences. But I went up to the operations shed one day. We really needed some information, and all my Afghan police officers are sitting there, and I don't have an interpreter. My interpreter is busy with something else right now. So between some broken English that they knew, between the Dari that I knew, and then a good deal of charades, I was still able to communicate what I had to, and they started doing charades back at me, and they were able to tell me what I needed to know, and we were drawing pictures, whatever we had to do to communicate with each other. But the rub was that I didn't say, well, I don't have an interpreter, so I can't go over there and do my job today.
Yeah. I mean, I think just being a leader, you have a responsibility to understand and learn the culture. And to the extent that that effort leads to or facilitates you accomplishing your mission, I don't care whether it's in business, whether it's in the military, a combination of the two in the logistical world, that's what you got to do.
Mm-hmm. But don't think that because somebody comes from a different culture, especially if you're in their country. I mean,
yeah.
Don't think that you're better than them. I mean, it's just different. Embrace it. I mean, I don't think a lot of people, most people don't operate that way. But if you're in a leadership position and perhaps you have that guy that you have that subordinate that might be the wrong guy, you know, you might want to keep him pinned up and have him do something different than engage your, be your L&O to the.
And there's nothing wrong with that. There are soldiers who just aren't meant to be going out there and doing the cross-culture piece. They're not good at it. They don't have the patience for it. And we don't have to pretend like this individual should be able to do this.
Oh, well, you probably wouldn't send that guy out in America to represent your business in the community either. My guess is that's just not his skill set.
Yeah, I'm not going to take my, Black Hawk pilot and have him leading a platoon on a live fire exercise in an infantry battalion.
Right.
That's not their skill set. So if I've got a maintenance sergeant, why am I sending them over to do some kind of cross-cultural negotiation piece? The individuals, it's not their skill set, so you don't have to send them over there.
And the Army's it's a big organization, so you're going to get all types.
Oh yeah.
And again, that's part of leadership, is to know that, hey, this NCO or this officer is, he's not the right guy, and that's part of being a leader and making those correct decisions and analyzing the situation and seeing who would be best.
And what you just said about some of the assumptions that people make, some of the disastrous assumptions are, we're smarter than they are, or I'm smarter than these people, they're from this backwards country, they don't know, they're not educated. I remember I told new guys coming in, all right, one, don't assume that they don't understand English. They all understand English. Don't make other assumptions about their culture, because they'll tell you right now you're wrong. You need to ask questions, because things that you assume are true will be false, and things that you assume are false are going to be true. When you're working with people from another culture, another army, another country, things you think are going to be easy are going to be some of the most difficult, and some of the most complex, difficult tasks you're going to find are going to be surprisingly easy and accomplishable. So you need to walk in with an open mind, and you need to learn about them. You need to learn about your environment.
It's kind of interesting listening to what all three of you were just saying, talking about critical thinking, creative thinking. It all fits in to exactly what you just said. And by the way, it's no more relevant and applicable overseas than it is right here. It's the exact same process. If you tend to necessarily do that here, my guess is you're going to do that if you have the opportunity for a deployment of some kind.
We got orders down. We had to get AMP up to Cochrane. Thought this was going to be some huge hoopla. They were like, no, we'll just grab a couple hundred guys out of the back, put them on pickup trucks, and off they went. And we had occupied Cochrane within a couple hours. Then I told the S4 shop they need to go over to the S1 shop and make some copies. Oh, I can't do that. They can they can do a movement to contact. They can seize a town. They can hold it. They can set up defensive positions. But I can't go to the room next door and make copies because das ist verboten. That copier belongs to the S4. I need my own copier. And that is exactly what you will face day in, day out.
Kind of harkens back to our discussion on regulations versus doctrine.
Yeah. It would take us 3 weeks to plan an operation that they can do in the next couple hours. However, not one of us would think twice about walking into a room, who cares what section it is, and making some copies. There, that belongs to this individual. I am not at their level. I may not use this copier.
Interesting.
I think the most vibrant observation that you see as you end your short tour or end an overseas tour or an operation is, as the new people come in, you see two common mistakes. And this is, it's the State Department, it's Doctors Without Borders, it's the people who are taking your job. They're one of two things. They're either, arrogant to the point of, I'm an American, I know everything, this is how I approach everything, or just conversely, they're overly accommodating. And no matter how ridiculous, the host nation request of the person you're dealing with is, your instinct is to overly accommodate. And you think about, well, when I first got here, I've probably made similar mistakes, but now my age, wisdom, and experience just being here has taught me better. And so every soldier at the end of his tour is a lot more cognizant and switched on to, what his situational awareness is much better, his situational understanding is much better. And the challenge is, let me help these new guys that are coming in, and that I have to right seat right. That this is what you need to know.
We have considered the cultural framework, and we've also taken in firsthand and secondhand data collection. Now we are finally ready to conduct the data analysis. This analysis can be used to make inferences and identify patterns in order to better understand and even more accurately predict future events. Conducting accurate and usable analysis requires the following: a comprehensive amount of data that can be effectively managed, comparison of the data, one's data, to data collected by others or other sources of data, a cultural framework that is appropriate for the situation, questionnaires, if they're available, that effectively elicit the perspectives of the population, a deep understanding of the cultural context through research, immersion, and interaction with the locals, and a deep understanding of one's own perspective and feelings in the situation. In addition, a casual analysis can determine the relation of a specific social or environmental variable and how these worldview perspectives will affect or change the mission. You'll see that the independent variables that we use and that we collect come from PMISI PT, ASCOPE, various things like that. But then we also have intervening variables. Those are our worldview, our perspective. And then finally, layered upon that, we have the dependent variables, and those give us the impact on mission. In addition, we need to look at the influences when we're assessing our data. Making inferences and identifying patterns can be heavily influenced by these 4 items: illusory correlation bias. This is the phenomenon in the study of a culture that can often be attributed by stereotypes or cognitive shortcuts held by an individual. In addition, we have availability heuristic, which is predicting the frequency of an event by using an example that most easily comes to mind. So we have to be careful when we're assessing our data that we're taking everything into account, not just what comes most easily to mind. We have the primacy recency effect, and this is the tendency to more easily recall what was most presented to us, or the most recent item that was most presented to us or reviewed or assessed with our data. So whatever comes to mind first and is last in the series of items, that's what's recalled most readily. And then we have the fundamental attribution error, where the person will not apply the same set of reasoning to a certain piece of data based upon his or her own behaviors when situational factors are taken into account. For instance, somebody might attribute, say for instance, George might attribute Sally's behavior as rude, and that's part of her natural personality. However, if George found himself to be rude, he might be saying he just had a bad day. So taking on some other situational factor and not his personality. So having that frame of reference when looking at data.
All right, throughout all of this, we've been exploring all sorts of different facets and aspects of culture. And we've been looking at how you can analyze cultural variables for military operations, for planning, how to be able to take all those variables and aspects of culture into account when conducting military's operations, because they do have an impact on what we do. So how critical is it to analyze these cultural variables?
In this day and age, in a 21st century battlefield, in this operational environment, I would say it is extremely critical that you understand all the nuances that can come into play in any type of operation that you're going to run, whether it's a foreign internal defense mission, stability support, or straight up kinetic combat. Understanding that environment that you're going to operate in, I think, helps reduce a lot of those friction points that we discussed earlier. especially since most of the staffs are going to be made up of captains and majors. We talk about iron majors. I would argue that there's iron captains out there too, and especially in the 21st century, we have really expanded the scope that our young officers really need to be able to embrace and understand and bring this into play throughout that MDMP process so that they can provide the commander as clear a picture as they can, framing that operational environment at that moment, understanding that it's probably going to change.
And what do you think would happen, when you're deployed, if you don't analyze these cultural variables and take them into account for your operations and your plans? I mean, you're as our operations SME here at SALT, what's your take on if we don't analyze these cultural variables? What effects are going to have?
Well, it's no different than we talk about in the operations block or the mission command block. In every situation, when you're in an Army problem-solving environment, you have contacts, you have content, you have the guidance, and you have what's written. Those are, this is how I want to go forward, and you got to bounce back and forth. It doesn't matter if you're MDMP, if you're troop leading procedures, if you're in design. You have to understand. And I have my content. Here's my commander's guidance. Here's an operations order. Now, how are we gonna meet these objectives? And you work it to a point, and then you culminate. You have to go back to content. You have to go back. You have to ask those RFIs. Gentlemen, I see what you want. This is what I think is an alternate and better course of action based on me being on the ground and real-time information what I need to do. It's long overdue, and I'm proud that we're finally talking about the strategic corporals and that we're talking about captains and lieutenants, because I'm sorry, they are our face to our nation. They're at the point, they are the critical point. They are the face to the customer. Those are the folks that are engaging the locals and making things happen, and we give them this in education in their Common Core. You will learn, culture. This culture is important. It's important enough that we're here today. Leadership knows it's important. Well, they have to leverage that, and understanding it and leveraging it and communicating that up and acting accordingly is everything for mission success.
Define culture. That's a toughie. I'm not exactly a sociologist, but I would assume that it is a group of people that have adopted the same type of rules, norms,
customs.
Yep. And that can be everything from food and dress to activities and things like that.
Yeah, it's the anthropology of that particular society. That's the culture, in my mind. It's the study of the people. It's the norms, the patterns, the customs,
the rules,
the religion, everything.
That defines that group of people.
Yep.
You can make 10 observations about a group of folks. Write it down, put it in a bucket, and then you string it all together. What are the similarities? What are the customs? What are their values? What do they believe? And there you go. That's their culture.
Well, the first thing that I think of is, earlier you talking about religion and values and norms and societal mores. I also think of it as a shared past and history and experiences. Experiences play a large role in this. Earlier in this lesson, we were discussing about Professor Hofstede and how some of his national cultural dimensions, how those are sort of related to what we use in the Army with PME-CPT and A-scope, and how these are all different ways to measure a culture in a society. And I was talking about the paper that I wrote in my master's program on Poland, and how they've got a really high uncertainty avoidance now. That's part of their culture. Why would they have a high uncertainty avoidance? Has anything happened to Poland over the last 300 years?
They've only been occupied about 4 times.
Yeah.
Hostile occupations, but you're right. It's not just a bunch of guys getting together and going, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to call ourselves the East Street something, and we're going to have a bunch of rules, and we're going to wear the same clothes. It's a lot more than that. It's a history. It's a much broader, deeper understanding of I guess of that club. You know, I mean, it's a unique club
Self-identification.
and self-identification, and that's a good point because you know when you, at least with my interactions with a lot of the Middle Eastern trips that I've taken, there were a lot of people that didn't identify themselves at first as an Iraqi. They identified themselves as something else, normally associated to a tribe. That's still very, very strong in that region. And again, it's one of those things that's a tip. Okay, they don't have a strong national identity, but they do certainly have strong identities to other things.
It's funny you mentioned that because when I was in Afghanistan, one of the things that would occur is they'd say, "Well, what tribe is this individual from?" It's like, I have no idea. We never talk about tribes. I've been here. I've been here for months and months and months. And I would know. I would find out about the tribes, but the individual I was talking to, who was all concerned about the tribe, well, they were from Iraq. That is where they had deployed to in the past. That was much more paramount there than it was in Afghanistan, and especially depending on what area of Afghanistan you were in. Because if I ask people, all right, who are you? I'm an Afghan. Okay, well, beyond that, who are you? Well, I'm a Pashtun, or I'm a Hazara, which is an ethnic group. You'd really have to get to know them before you start finding out what tribe or clan or family they were from. And it's not unlike Americans. You know, what are you? I'm an American. Well, what more than that? Well, I'm from Kansas. I'm from Missouri. I'm from New York. All right, more than that. Well, I'm Irish. And, you know, we kind of go down that path. And that I found similar between us and them, which everybody else who talked about Iraq is always going on about tribes. And
what I also kind of self-discovery is I think a lot of that strong identity to the family, clan, tribe lineage is because a lot of these cultures are centuries old, much older than ours. And for a very long time, their survival depended on those tight interpersonal relationships and those tribal affiliations, and in some situations, war with other tribes for territory or resources or things like that. But you know, when that, as you talked about in the last question, you know, you talk about those rich, long histories. You know, we ran into that as Americans. We ran into those situations where I didn't like that guy. Well, why? Well, he belongs to that tribe. Well, these tribes have had an issue for 200 years, but they certainly remember that because that's part of their culture. Okay, and that comes into play sometimes.
And that history is so vitally important because, you know, Afghanistan. When I got there, I saw pictures of the palaces back in the 50s and 60s. Well, first of all, I went down to Marja and I was wondering, and Lashkargah, and I was wondering, why do all these homes look like 50s Americans' homes? Why do I see little white picket fences? Why do I see these little square houses and shutters? And why is there a Ferris wheel across the river?
A little out of place.
It was an entire area that had been developed by Americans back in the 50s. Americans used to vacation there if you went up to the Bamiyan province. And you see pictures of the palaces from back then. And I remember one clear as day, I believe it was the Queen's Palace, and green grass in front of it and trees. And there was a man and a woman walking down the sidewalk in front of it. The man was in a suit and the woman was wearing a very 50s, early 60s dress.
Western style dress.
Yes. And then you see Afghanistan today and it looks absolutely nothing like that. And people would tell me that, you know, this, that, or the other in the marketplace, this is their culture. Well, this is their culture that has resulted from 30 years of pure war and devastation. What the culture was prior to that was different. Not everything, but aspects of it. What were our parents or grandparents like following the Great Depression? What was their culture, the culture of their generation of Americans? We share a lot, but certain parts come from your history, whether it be recent,
or from the region you're from. I mean, if you grew up in the Midwest like I did, it tends to be a little bit more oriented towards agriculture and livestock and those types of things, as opposed to growing up on maybe the East or West Coast that would maybe be more oriented towards, you know, something else, or growing up in a major metropolitan city like, you know, New York or LA, San Francisco, or some of the other big cities. You certainly are shaped by that too, as you grow up in that own culture. I mean, you are immersed in that, and you are, you know, molded into that. I mean, as a child, and you grow up and become an adult and those things. I mean, you assimilate into that group, and you accept those norms, for most of us do anyway, and you become that
product of your environment.
Exactly.
It has a large role in what the culture is. The culture is not a hard and fast. No hard and fast rules with this.
And it can change, as we have seen something as relatively short from the 50s until now in Afghanistan. That's a relatively short period of time when it comes to looking at cultures, but a significant change.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Jason, I think it goes back to what I said earlier about writing down 10 things that, about a culture, throwing it in a pot, and all the things that we all agree on. That's a good starting point. You got to first, figure out, what's the common religion, what's the common background, what's the common tribe, what's the common beliefs, what's the common practices and theories, and, what do they do here? So that's the starting point.
And it's funny you say that because, if you're doing that with a specific culture, region, ethnicity, nation, whatever, well, you're going to keep hitting the same things again and again, so you can start using those exact same measuring sticks in other areas, which is how we come up with stuff like PMECPT.
PMECPT, then the Army has adopted that paradigm to help narrow this, an attempt to categorize and understand some of these different cultures that we have come in contact with. It is not all-encompassing.
No.
But for those of us, have been on staffs and understand that you're always under a time constraint, again, we go back to that one. But in order for us to hit, as what John said, the things that are most important that will probably help us understand what we're dealing with here, the political and the social and the military and all of these things that begin to give us that clearer picture of this culture and its history, maybe even lead us to being able to understand how they will react in certain situations. That example of the film with the Iraqi talking about the Americans are always in a hurry, and we always tell them, oh sure, I'll get it done, and the Americans are always mad at us because we don't. Well, part of that is the Iraqis didn't want to make the Americans mad. Mm-hmm. So therefore, they're going to give you the answer they think that you're looking for, knowing full well that they're not going to meet that deadline because, again, we go back to that thing about time, and time to them is different than time to us, and eventually it does get done, but it gets done based on their culture and their social norms and their understanding of what needs to be done. So, we came up with PMECPT. We also came up with something called ASCOPE. Mm-hmm. And again, it's kind of an abbreviated version. And
more on the civilian side.
More on the civilian side
focus.
To understand, again, but it's still pretty much aimed at the same general answer. Well, what is the culture here that I'm dealing with? Is it, Eastern or Western? Is it time-oriented? Is it tribal-based? Does religion hold a great amount of power in the government? Is the government secular? There's a lot of things that we need to kind of sort through so we get a better understanding of how to deal with and assist and work within that country's environmental, operational environment, so to speak.
Well, I always like to use the example of, you're the guy on the ground, you're the captain, you're the major on the ground, and you're trying to relay that information to your raider and senior raider, how I get the vision, I get my marching orders, but I owe it to you to tell you what the situation is on the ground. Mm-hmm. And when I was a young captain, I once told my boss, sir, I can do that, but it's like asking for permission to smoke in church. It's highly inappropriate for me to ask what you're asking me to do. And once I put it in that context, okay, I got it, John. I'll back off. How should we do this? I give him the alternate solution, and there you go.
Well, and that's a good point right there, the alternate solution, because it's all about accomplishing the mission, getting the job done. But, all right, obviously we're talking about stability operations here. We're not talking about offense. And culture's going to play a big role when you're doing stability operations. And whatever you're trying to accomplish, it's all about the end state. You're trying to achieve the end state. Whatever the means are that you have to use to get there is irrelevant. Yes, we have the American way of doing things. Yes, we have the American Army way of doing things. However, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. And I tried to learn a great deal from my Afghans, from my interpreter, from the Afghan governance that I had to work with, because a lot of times they already had it figured out. And they just needed some help from me, and I needed some help from them to accomplish my mission. So get the job done. Focus on the end state. Don't focus on how you have to get there. Great little story on that, how this happened. I had one experience once where I had an Army officer. He was not a combat advisor. He hadn't gone through the school like I did. He was a regular logistics captain, I believe he was. He was tasked to expand the FOB. And he went out there and had his soldiers put up signs all around the FOB saying, you know, in 3 days, the U.S. Army is going to be expanding this, expanding the borders. If this land belongs to you, please contact the Afghan police or the American security forces here and let us know, because we didn't want to take anybody's land by accident. And most of the records of whose land belonged to who had been destroyed through all the wars. So he puts out these signs. And he wants to speak to my Afghan general and let him know that he's going to be expanding the FOB. So we go and see the general. And the general says, well, it's very nice you have put out all these signs, but what you really need to do is put a couple of your bulldozers out there, stack your concertina wire, stack the sandbags and everything, put all your equipment out there, and then we'll wait 3 days and then you can start. And the captain says, I'm sorry, sir, but I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to put my equipment out there for 3 days and hope it's there when I'm done. I put out signs for people. They know what we're going to do. He's like, yes, and I've seen them, and they are very nice signs, but I need you to put your equipment out there. And once again, the captain comes back and says, no, sir, I cannot do that. I can't put my equipment out there, but I have put the signs up, and I can put up more signs if it's needed. And the Afghan general says, I appreciate your signs. They are very beautiful, but I need you to put your equipment out there. At this point, the captain got very upset at the general. And I asked him to please calm down for a minute and let me talk to the general. And so I spoke to the general. I said, sir, why do you not like the signs? Why are these not making you happy? And he said, his eyes were kind of low. He didn't want to say it. But he said, the people can't read. No one's literate anymore. They're running like a 90% illiteracy rate over there right now. It's just the smallest children that are finally getting to go to school.
But by putting like construction equipment out, they understood what that meant.
Yeah, and in our own history, you go back to New England, there's signs hanging up everywhere, and it says what the store is, but it also has a picture above it, because in colonial times, so many people couldn't read. Now, here was a situation where you had tension developing between two individuals because one did not realize that the other one was trying to be extremely polite and not say that the people surrounding the camp couldn't read.
Yeah, and actually two things kind of happened there. You had the captain who was unaware of the culture that he was coming very close to insulting, and then you had the general who was extremely embarrassed having to admit anything like that. But this goes back to the original question, does understanding culture impact combat ops? Or any type of operation, I would say absolutely. It would certainly reduce, and we talked about this earlier, those friction points that truly can grind any type of an operation either to a complete halt or extend those timelines to the point where, as Americans, we become very upset with our counterparts. And that leads to other things. So this young captain, I guess, I hope with your help, understood that by putting his equipment out there, but in something simple to put some guards out there if he was concerned about the equipment running off, but that would have sent the message that something's about to happen here, I better go check this out. And they would have come to the gate and said, hey, what's with the equipment? But again, understanding that culture and the 90% illiteracy rate, that's a big deal. That's something you have to deal with all the time. But we talked about in other lessons through this whole 75 hours, we talked about that strategic corporal and making that snap decision at a road checkpoint, and and what John was talking about, being able to assess the situation on the ground and pass that information back up. But we all have to have an understanding of that culture that we're working in. Mm-hmm. For fear that I've got a male a corporal at a checkpoint and he jerks a female out of the car because he wants to do a bomb check. That may have just caused months.
Yeah, you see my reaction to that.
To what that soldier trying to do his job, knowing the commander's intent. All vehicles get searched, and he blew it.
Yeah, actually, in that one example, and I was a captain at the time, it did turn out well. We all went outside together and we walked around and we looked at where the construction was going to be, and the general, patted him on the shoulder and everything was okay in the end. But the funny part was, as we're walking back, he came over to me and he's like, I haven't been to the combat advisors course. I'll just come to you from now on, and can you handle this for me? I was like, yeah, I've got it, man. You go ahead and take care of the fob. I'll take care of it. Because it's one thing that a lot of people don't get, but those who are assigned as advisors and have been doing this for a long time, yes, we're advisors, but also liaisons. I mean, really, when it gets down to it, we are liaisons, because you got your warfighters that are out there trying to do their jobs. They're trying to prosecute the war, trying to secure the environment for the people and provide stability and get the bad guys. And you've got the Afghans or the Iraqis who are doing the exact same thing, but being able to understand those cultural differences. I saw British officers fighting with American officers. I saw New Zealanders fighting with Australians. I saw French officers fighting with. It didn't matter where they were from. Everybody had a different culture.
There's friction. There's friction among all cultures, not just east and west, but west and west, and east, and everything in between. And sometimes it can be over some very minor misunderstandings.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's hilarious that the kind of stuff that you'll go on and the relationships. I mean, even amongst the British soldiers, the Canadian soldiers, and the American soldiers, and then break us up even further into the Marine Corps and the Air Force. And there's a great example right there within our own services. The Air Force, the Marine Corps, and the Army, do they all have their own culture?
We barely get along.
That's in our own Department of Defense. All right, in today's lesson, AC 111, culture and its impact on military operations, we've examined a lot of different topics and subjects and their effects on culture. Specifically, we've looked at a definition of culture, how individuals create cultural groups, a discussion of cultural analysis methodologies, both the Army's versions of it and some of the external civilian sources, and a discussion of how culture shapes military operations. All of this has been put together in order to analyze cultural considerations for military plans and operations, basically how to analyze the cultural variables. So what's your greatest takeaway from this lesson? I mean, what did we learn here? I think if you put it all together, it's basically to realize that culture is not something that can be understood in a 5-minute reading off of the internet. It can't be understood by taking a course for 2-3 months. It's even difficult to understand it after an entire year's deployment, living in another culture. Cultures are very, very deep, they're very rich, they're based on many different factors. Everything that goes into PME-CPT, everything that goes into ASCOPE, some of the other cultural dimensions like we saw that Professor Hofstede has developed. You also have the shared historical background, some of the experiences people have gone through. And then it gets broken up even further into what region, what state, what province, what tribe, what ethnicity. All of that factors in together for a group's culture and how you define it and how you measure it and how we're going to conduct operations and planning in that environment. So that is the end of the Across Cultures block. This has been a 3-hour lesson. I want to wish you good luck on the rest of your 75 hours of Common Core and good luck on your post-lesson quiz.